It was supposed to be just another tech conference, a routine gathering of the brightest minds in the world. The air was thick with anticipation as attendees lined the sleek, minimalist hall. The stage was set for Elon Musk, the CEO of Tesla and SpaceX, to deliver a speech that would leave everyone in awe. After all, Elon had become something of a modern-day oracle in the tech world. His insights were groundbreaking, his predictions often eerily accurate. The audience was expecting nothing less than another genius forecast for the future of electric cars, Mars colonization, or artificial intelligence. But then, something happened. Elon walked onto the stage, his familiar black suit and sneakers making him look as effortlessly cool as always. He paused for a moment, looked out over the sea of faces, and then, instead of diving into his usual well-rehearsed speech about rockets and electric vehicles, he said something unexpected. "I'm not going to talk about tech today," Elon announced with a slight grin, his eyes scanning the audience. There was a collective intake of breath. Had he forgotten his speech? Or was this part of some elaborate new strategy? He had always been known for his unorthodox methods, but this was something different. The crowd fell silent. Elon continued, his voice steady but laced with something different. Was it excitement? Nerves? The audience leaned in, eager to understand where this was going. Then, without any warning, Elon took a deep breath and began to sing. Yes. Sing. Not a snip of a song, not a quirky intro, he started belting out the opening lines of Space Oddity by David Bowie. The crowd's initial reaction was confusion. Was this a joke? Was he serious? It was a bizarre mix of disbelief and laughter that rippled through the room. Some couldn't help but chuckle, unsure of whether they should join in, while others just stared, unsure how to react. The man who had built electric cars that could drive themselves, who was sending humans to Mars, was now singing on stage like he was auditioning for a rock band. As Elon sang, his voice a little off-pitch but filled with enthusiasm, the audience's reactions became more mixed. Some people chuckled awkwardly, unsure if this was some strange metaphor for the future of technology. Others, mostly the younger crowd, were taking videos, their phones raised high. It was odd, surreal, and totally unexpected. The entire room was held hostage by his bizarre decision. When he finished, there was a long, uncomfortable silence. The crowd didn't know whether to applaud or to leave the room. Was this a moment of genius? Or had Elon Musk completely lost his mind? For a few seconds, the only sound in the hall was the faint hum of the microphones and the nervous shuffling of feet. But then, unexpectedly, someone in the back row clapped. And then someone else. Slowly, the applause began to build, awkward at first, but then growing stronger. Before long, the room was filled with genuine applause. But it wasn't just for the performance, it was for the audacity, the unpredictability, the sheer courage it took for a man of Elon's stature to step out on a stage and do something so radically different. But Elon, always the master of reinvention, wasn't fazed. He gave a half-smile and shrugged. "Well," he said, his voice dripping with that signature Musk humor, "I guess we could all use a little more music in our lives, don't you think?" And just like that, the moment passed. The crowd slowly settled into a mix of shock and amusement. The presentation had taken a sharp left turn, but Elon was already on to the next topic. He launched into his regular talk on sustainable energy and the future of humanity. No more singing, no more jokes. But that moment stuck. The press had a field day, of course. Headlines from around the world screamed, "Elon Musk sings at tech conference." What's next? Is Elon Musk losing his mind? Some claimed it was a genius move, a way of getting attention, while others said it was a PR disaster. But the more people talked about it, the more curious everyone became. Elon Musk had been known for his eccentricities before, but this was next level. For those who had witnessed it, the question lingered, why did he do it? Was it a momentary lapse in judgment, or was there something more to it? Something about this bizarre turn of events felt like it was the start of something bigger. It was almost like a spark had been ignited, something far more profound than just a funny, offbeat performance. What if this moment was a metaphor? What if Elon had just revealed a deeper truth about himself, or about the world we were all living in? As the event wrapped up, and the room slowly emptied, the buzz continued to echo through the halls. People gathered in small groups, chatting excitedly. The press scrambled to get a statement from Tesla's PR team. But no one could really explain it. Not the journalists, not the attendees, and not even Elon himself. All anyone knew was that, for better or worse, the tech world would never be the same again. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The question lingered, unanswered, in the minds of those who had witnessed the unthinkable. And for Elon Musk, it was the beginning of a much larger transformation. One that would not only challenge the way people viewed him but change the way the world thought about leadership, failure, and success. What if this was the moment that unlocked a new chapter for the man who had revolutionized the tech industry? What if singing a song was more than just a joke? Maybe it was a statement, one that would change everything. The world knows Elon Musk as the man who made electric cars cool, the one with a vision of colonizing Mars, and the eccentric billionaire who tweets about everything from memes to artificial intelligence. But who is the person behind the headlines? What drives him? And what shaped him into the unconventional, unpredictable figure who just shocked an entire conference with an impromptu performance of Space Oddity? Elon Musk was born on June 28, 1971, in Pretoria, South Africa. His childhood was far from ordinary, and it's easy to see how those early years shaped the man who would eventually redefine several industries. He was the eldest of 3 children, raised by his mother, May Musk, a model and dietitian, and his father, Elon Musk, an electromechanical engineer and property developer. Elon's parents had a tumultuous relationship, and his father's detached, sometimes distant personality left a mark on Elon from an early age. While May was warm and supportive, Elon's tough love and cold demeanor were often hard for Elon to navigate. As a child, he struggled with loneliness, often retreating into books and his own thoughts for solace. From the moment Elon could read, he was voracious. He consumed books on everything from science fiction to biographies of famous inventors and scientists. It wasn't long before he became fascinated by computers. At the age of 10, Elon taught himself to program, eventually creating and selling a video game called Blaster at the age of 12. The game, a simple space shooter, sold for about $500, an early glimpse into the innovative mind that would later develop groundbreaking technologies. His early education was marked by a deep sense of isolation. Elon was frequently bullied at school, an experience that left him with a deep sense of social discomfort. He later described his childhood as a series of difficult adjustments, trying to fit in while also feeling like he was on the outside looking in. Despite his academic prowess, he often felt disconnected from others. It wasn't until his teenage years that Elon began to develop the resilience that would later characterize his entrepreneurial journey. At 17, Elon moved to Canada to attend Queen's University, seeking distance from his father. A year later, he transferred to the University of Pennsylvania in the United States, where he earned degrees in both economics and physics. It was at Penn where Elon began to develop the ideas that would later form the backbone of his companies. But it wasn't just academics that shaped him, it was also the people he encountered along the way. In 1995, Elon dropped out of Stanford University after just 2 days to pursue his first business venture, Zip2, an online city guide for newspapers. The risk was enormous, but Elon was determined. His work ethic was unmatched. He poured his energy into Zip2, working long hours, often sleeping on the office floor. The company was eventually sold to Compaq for $307 million, giving Elon his first taste of success. But Elon didn't stop there. The money from Zip2 helped fund his next venture, X.com, which would later become PayPal. In just a few short years, PayPal revolutionized online payments and was sold to eBay for $1.5 billion in 2002. By then, Elon had made a name for himself not just as a businessman, but as a visionary, someone who saw potential where others saw impossibilities. It was the next chapter of his career that would truly set him apart from the world's other tech billionaires. In 2002, Elon founded SpaceX, with the audacious goal of making space travel more affordable and, ultimately, enabling the colonization of Mars. A year later, he became the largest shareholder in Tesla, a company on the brink of bankruptcy. He poured his personal fortune into both companies, despite facing immense public skepticism. People doubted SpaceX's ability to land rockets, let alone send humans to Mars. They questioned Tesla's viability, with critics calling electric cars impractical. But Elon, with his trademark combination of determination and idealism, pressed on. His obsession with space was driven by more than just a love of exploration. It was rooted in a deep belief that humanity needed to become a multiplanetary species to ensure its survival. It was this same belief that fueled his desire to push the limits of what was possible, both on Earth and beyond. While Elon's career was soaring, his personal life was much more turbulent. He married Justine Musk in 2000, and they had 5 children together before their divorce in 2008. He then married actress Tallulah Riley in 2010, only to divorce her in 2012. Elon's relationships, often intense and volatile, mirrored his business ventures, bold, fast-moving, and prone to the occasional collapse. Despite his success, Elon's life has never been simple. The media portrayal of him as a genius tech mogul often overlooks the underlying struggles he has faced. He has spoken openly about the emotional toll his work has taken on him, how difficult it is to balance his ambitions with his personal life, and how the pressure to succeed has sometimes pushed him to the brink. But what makes Elon Musk unique is his willingness to embrace failure. He once said, "Failure is an option here. If things are not failing, you are not innovating enough." It's a philosophy that has defined both his personal and professional life. When SpaceX's first 3 rocket launches failed, most companies would have folded, but not Musk. He poured his remaining fortune into the next launch, and when the 4th attempt succeeded, it marked the beginning of SpaceX's rise to prominence. It's no surprise then that the person who shocked a room full of tech enthusiasts by singing a song wasn't just making a spontaneous, humorous decision. In his own way, Elon Musk had always been unconventional. His willingness to take risks, whether in business, technology, or in moments like this one, was a defining part of who he was. What was even more striking was the fact that the crowd, despite their confusion and skepticism, seemed to embrace Elon's quirks. Perhaps this was the key to his success, his ability to make people feel like they were part of something bigger than themselves. They weren't just listening to a tech mogul who was going to change the world, they were watching someone who wasn't afraid to be imperfect, to take risks, and to do things that others might think were foolish. As the audience filed out of the conference, people were still talking about the moment Elon Musk had sung in front of them. Some were wondering if he had truly lost his mind, while others were starting to realize something deeper. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't just an eccentricity. It was a glimpse into the very soul of the man who had redefined the boundaries of possibility. Elon Musk wasn't just a businessman. He was an idea. An idea that sometimes, in order to make progress, you have to break the rules. To challenge convention. To sing in front of a crowd when everyone expects you to speak. And perhaps, just perhaps, that was the key to understanding why Elon Musk had decided to sing that day. It wasn't about the performance, it was about the statement. The message that even the most unlikely actions could spark the biggest changes. The question remained, though, what was he going to do next? After Elon Musk's impromptu performance at the tech conference, the media frenzy was hard to ignore. Headlines flooded the internet, with journalists and influencers scrambling to dissect the meaning behind his unexpected stunt. For many, it was just another eccentric move in a long line of unconventional decisions. But for others, it raised a more troubling question: was Elon Musk losing his edge? In the days that followed, whispers began circulating within the tech community. People who had once admired Musk's brilliance now started to wonder if his sense of direction was beginning to fray. The performance, while entertaining, had been unpredictable, something you might expect from a rock star, not the leader of some of the world's most innovative companies. To add fuel to the fire, Tesla's stock took a hit in the days following the conference. While the dip was small, it was enough to raise eyebrows. Some analysts were quick to point out that investors had grown accustomed to Elon's larger-than-life persona, but now, they were starting to question whether his antics were becoming a liability. After all, the market was fickle, and investors didn't like uncertainty, especially when it came from someone as high-profile as Musk. The concerns didn't stop there. Inside Tesla and SpaceX, employees were starting to feel the pressure. Elon's ambitious timelines, which had once felt like the bold decisions of a visionary, were now starting to seem unrealistic. SpaceX, after years of success, was struggling to meet certain milestones for their Starship program, and Tesla was facing increasing competition in the electric vehicle market. The pressure on Elon to deliver on his promises was mounting, and the weight of his vision was beginning to feel heavier than ever before. Elon had always been known for his intense work ethic. He often boasted about sleeping on the floor of the Tesla factory and working around the clock. But lately, his frenetic pace seemed to be catching up with him. His employees were starting to notice it. During meetings, he would sometimes lose focus, drifting off mid-conversation. He would often dismiss concerns from his teams, insisting that his way was the only way. His vision was clear to him, but it was becoming harder to communicate that vision to his team. One evening, after a particularly stressful meeting about Tesla's delayed production numbers, Elon retreated to his office, staring out at the night sky through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The weight of his decisions was taking its toll, and he found himself in a rare moment of doubt. He had always prided himself on his ability to make the impossible possible. He had built a multi-billion-dollar empire from scratch, taken on the most ambitious projects imaginable, and constantly pushed the boundaries of innovation. But now, as he gazed at the stars, his ultimate goal to colonize Mars seeming so far out of reach, he questioned if it was all worth it. What if he had gone too far this time? What if his push to revolutionize the world had led him down a dangerous path, where the pressure to succeed was no longer driving him forward, but slowly breaking him down? He shook off the thought. I can't afford to doubt myself, he thought. His mission, his vision, was bigger than just him. There were people depending on him, on Tesla, on SpaceX, on everything he was trying to build. If he failed, it wouldn't just be his loss. It would be humanity's loss. The thought of giving up didn't cross his mind. Elon Musk wasn't the type to quit. But deep down, he knew that the road ahead was going to be harder than ever. He was about to face a series of challenges that would test not just his resolve, but the future of everything he had worked for. The pressure was mounting from every direction. Investors, who had once been dazzled by his bold promises, were beginning to lose faith. Tesla's production delays were becoming a public relations nightmare. Critics were becoming louder, questioning whether Elon could actually deliver on his many ambitious projects. The media, once enamored by his every move, began to shift their tone, calling into question his ability to lead. And it wasn't just external forces causing trouble. The once harmonious culture within his companies was beginning to show signs of stress. Employees were burning out, with some openly criticizing Elon's management style. They had bought into his vision at first, but now, many of them were wondering if it was worth it. Was it worth sacrificing their personal lives, their mental health, and their well-being for a mission that seemed to be spiraling out of control? The turning point came one late night in the Tesla factory. The line for the Model 3, a car that was supposed to be Tesla's mass-market success, was falling behind schedule again. Elon had been on site for hours, working tirelessly to make sure everything was running smoothly. He had been pushing the team hard, demanding they meet impossible deadlines. But now, as he watched the assembly line falter, he realized just how close they were to failure. A small team had been tasked with getting the production line back up to speed, and Elon was standing over them, barking orders. The team was exhausted, having worked long hours, and their morale was low. As they struggled to fix the issue, Elon grew impatient. His frustration bubbled over. "Why aren't you working faster?" he snapped. "This is unacceptable. Do you understand how much is riding on this?" One of the engineers, a young woman named Sarah, looked up at him, her eyes wide with exhaustion and frustration. "Elon, we're doing everything we can. But we're at the breaking point here. We can't keep working like this." Elon's eyes narrowed. It was a rare moment of confrontation with someone who wasn't afraid to challenge him. For a split second, he wanted to argue, to push harder. But instead, he did something unexpected. He stepped back. The tension in the air was thick, but for the first time in a long while, he found himself listening, not just to her words, but to the weight behind them. Sarah wasn't the only one who felt the pressure. It was clear now that the people who had once been inspired by his vision were starting to crack under the strain of his relentless drive. Something needed to change. If Elon didn't recognize the cracks in his empire soon, he risked losing everything. The question was, would he be able to pull everything back together before it was too late? Or had the strain of his ambition finally caught up with him? The tension was palpable. The cracks in the facade were beginning to show, and Elon was going to have to face them, head-on, if he hoped to preserve everything he had worked for. The stakes had never been higher. The days following that tense moment in the Tesla factory were a blur for Elon Musk. He had always prided himself on his ability to think quickly and make decisions under pressure, but this time, the challenges felt overwhelming. It wasn't just a production delay or a technical failure, it was a crisis of faith. The company, the people around him, and perhaps even Elon himself were at a breaking point. The weight of the ambition he had carried for so long was starting to feel suffocating. He knew something had to change. But where to start? Every decision he made seemed to push the company further into chaos. His usual confidence and unshakable belief in his vision felt like a distant memory. In the quiet moments between meetings, between constant phone calls and emails, he found himself wondering, was it time to pull back? Should I scale down? But scaling down was never part of Elon's DNA. He wasn't someone who played it safe or took the easy route. When everyone else told him he was crazy for dreaming of colonizing Mars, he pushed forward. When the experts warned him that electric cars would never be able to compete with gas-powered vehicles, he doubled down on Tesla. Giving up now would be like admitting defeat, and that wasn't a path he could follow. The decision was made. He would push harder. He would give everything he had, even if it meant alienating the very people who had supported him. His leadership, at least in his mind, had always been about seeing the big picture, about sacrificing the short-term discomforts for the long-term rewards. But the question remained, how much longer could he go on this way? The moment of reckoning came when SpaceX's Starship program reached a critical point. The test flights for the new spacecraft had been unsuccessful, and the timeline for sending humans to Mars was slipping further out of reach. The pressure on Elon intensified, and it became clear that his two companies were inextricably linked. Tesla's success fueled SpaceX's ambitions, and vice versa. But with both companies facing challenges, Elon had reached a crossroads. He could either double down on his vision or accept that some dreams were just too big to reach. He called a meeting at SpaceX's headquarters in Hawthorne, California. It was a rare moment when he allowed himself to gather his key leaders, those who had been with him from the early days. They had seen him through the ups and downs, and this was the moment when Elon knew he would have to make a choice, to continue at full speed or to pull back and reevaluate everything. As the meeting started, there was a palpable sense of uncertainty in the room. The team was exhausted, their morale low. Some were beginning to question whether SpaceX's original goal, colonizing Mars, was even realistic anymore. They had all followed Elon because of his unshakable belief in the impossible. But now, some were starting to wonder, was it still possible? Elon paced the room, his usual energy absent. For the first time in a long while, he felt as though he had to prove himself, not just to the world, but to his own team. They had believed in him, in his vision, but now they were tired. Tired of the constant setbacks, tired of the never-ending grind. He couldn't help but feel a flicker of doubt. What if they're right? What if we've reached the limits of what we can do? Finally, he spoke. His voice was quieter than usual, and there was an almost tangible vulnerability in his words. We've had a tough year, Elon began. There's no denying that. Tesla is fighting a new wave of competition, and SpaceX has hit some snags with Starship. But here's the thing. We're going to push through. We've always pushed through. He paused, looking around the room at the faces of the people who had built SpaceX from the ground up. These weren't just employees, they were his team, his family. And in this moment, Elon realized something important. He couldn't do it alone, not anymore. I know it's been hard. I know you're all tired, he continued, his voice a little shakier. But I need you all to believe in me, in this mission, just like you did when we started. We are going to make it through. And not just because we've had success in the past, but because we've always found a way to make the impossible possible. There was a long silence. The team exchanged looks, unsure of what to say. They had seen Elon at his most confident, his most relentless. But today, he seemed different. More human. It was almost as if the pressure had cracked open a vulnerability they hadn't seen before. One of the senior engineers, a woman named Rachel, spoke up. Elon, we all believe in this mission. We do. But it's getting harder to see how we're going to make it work. We need to take a step back and figure out how to fix things, not just keep pushing forward and hoping for the best. Elon didn't reply immediately. Her words stung. They were true, but they also challenged the very core of his philosophy. Pushing forward, no matter the cost, had always been the answer. And yet, as he looked around the room, at the tired faces of the people who had given everything to this vision, he couldn't ignore the fact that they were right. The old way of doing things wasn't working anymore. He took a deep breath, then made a decision. You're right. We need to reevaluate. Not just the mission, but how we approach it. I've been pushing all of you too hard. I've been pushing myself too hard. It's time to take a step back and figure out how we can move forward smarter, not just harder. It was a turning point. Elon Musk, the man who had built his empire by outpacing everyone around him, was admitting that he couldn't keep pushing indefinitely. It wasn't a sign of weakness, it was a sign of strength. He realized that even the most ambitious dreams needed time to grow. And sometimes, even the boldest ideas had to be reworked and recalibrated. The next few weeks were filled with late-night strategy sessions, with Elon taking a more hands-off approach. He allowed his leadership team to step forward, empowering them to come up with new solutions. Instead of driving every decision himself, he learned to trust those around him. And yet, despite this new approach, the pressure remained. Tesla's market share was slipping. SpaceX's Starship program still had many hurdles to overcome. The clock was ticking, and the stakes were as high as ever. Elon knew he had to deliver, but this time, he would do it differently. He would not let his vision blind him to the reality that sometimes, the most difficult journey was the one that required you to stop, reflect, and change course. The real test was coming. Would the new approach work? Or had Elon Musk waited too long to make these changes? Only time would tell. The question remained. Could Elon Musk balance the vision of the future with the reality of the present? The stakes were higher than ever, and the challenges were mounting. But one thing was clear, Elon wasn't ready to give up. He never had been. The weeks after the pivotal meeting at SpaceX's headquarters marked a shift. There was a noticeable change in the atmosphere at both Tesla and SpaceX. Elon Musk, once known for his relentless drive and constant pressure on his employees, was now showing a more measured, reflective side. While he had always been an unconventional leader, one who inspired with grand ideas and wild ambition, he was now learning to temper that ambition with humility and a deeper understanding of his team's limits. But even as Elon made these adjustments, the reality of his situation remained. Tesla's stock continued to fluctuate, and SpaceX's Starship program was still far from reaching its goals. The media, which had once adored him, now took a more cynical tone. Critics were everywhere, questioning whether his dreams were too lofty and if his companies were just a house of cards waiting to collapse under the pressure of his own vision. The weight of it all began to feel unbearable. It wasn't just the external pressure that weighed on Elon. For the first time in years, he found himself truly questioning his own capacity to lead. He had spent so much time pushing forward, so much time focused on the end goal, that he had lost sight of the people who helped him build it. His relentless pursuit of greatness had come at a cost. He had alienated those closest to him, both professionally and personally. And now, as the challenges mounted, he began to wonder if it was all worth it. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Elon found himself standing alone on the balcony of his private residence in Los Angeles. The city lights stretched before him like a sea of possibilities, but they felt distant, out of reach. He had always been a visionary, a man who saw the world differently and believed that anything was possible. But in this moment, as the cool evening breeze brushed against his face, he felt a gnawing emptiness. The problem was, he had put so much of his identity into his companies that, without them, who was he? Without SpaceX, Tesla, and his various ventures, what did he have left? He had poured his soul into these dreams, sacrificed everything, and yet, here he was, alone with nothing but his thoughts. For the first time in years, Elon let himself truly feel the weight of his journey. He thought about his family, his children, his ex-wives, and the relationships that had crumbled under the pressure of his ambition. He thought about his employees, many of whom had left or become disillusioned with the direction he was taking. And he thought about those early days, when it was just him, a few engineers, and a dream of changing the world. That dream had not changed, not at its core. He still wanted to build a better future for humanity, still wanted to make life multiplanetary, and still believed in electric cars as the future of transportation. But in the process of chasing that dream, he had lost something important: connection, balance, and, most of all, himself. What if I've been doing it all wrong? Elon thought, the question echoing in his mind. What if the cost of my vision has been too high? As the night stretched on, he found himself in a deep internal struggle. There was still so much left to achieve. Mars was still out there, still waiting. But was it worth the destruction of everything he had built along the way? Was it worth the loneliness, the sacrifices, the relationships that had crumbled in the pursuit of something that seemed more and more like a distant fantasy? The answer didn't come easily. But after hours of contemplation, Elon reached a decision. The time had come for a change, both in his approach to business and in his personal life. He couldn't keep barreling forward, ignoring the people who mattered most. His vision for the future was still as clear as ever, but the path forward had to be different. It had to include the people who had supported him all along. The next morning, Elon called an emergency meeting with his leadership teams at both Tesla and SpaceX. This time, it wasn't just about the numbers, the timelines, or the technology. This meeting was about something far more important: rethinking the way forward and redefining his role in the companies he had built. As the team gathered around the table, Elon stood before them, no longer the confident, unflappable leader they had once known. There was a sense of vulnerability in his voice as he addressed them. "I've made a lot of mistakes," he began. "I've pushed you all too hard. I've been focused on the big picture, but I've neglected the people who made it all possible. And for that, I'm sorry." The room was silent, as his words hung heavy in the air. It was clear that this was not just an apology, it was a confession, a moment of self-awareness that had eluded him for so long. "I've always believed that if you want to change the world, you have to be relentless. But I've realized that the most important part of that journey is the people around you, the team, the family, the partners. I've lost sight of that. and I need you all to help me make it right." There was a pause, and then Rachel, the same senior engineer who had spoken to him at the factory, raised her hand. "Elon," she said, "we've all been in this together. And we all believe in your vision. But we need to do this together, not just for you, but for all of us. If you're willing to change, then so are we." Those words, simple but profound, marked a turning point for Elon. For the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, the dream was still possible. But it would require something he hadn't done before: collaboration, trust, and a willingness to listen, not just to his own vision, but to the voices of the people who would help him bring it to life. That night, after the meeting, Elon sat alone in his office. The weight of the decision was still heavy on his shoulders, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace. The road ahead was uncertain, and there were no guarantees that everything would work out. But he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't do it alone. And if he was going to make his dream a reality, he would have to take the people who believed in him with him, every step of the way. It wasn't the easy path. But it was the right one. As the sun began to rise over the horizon, Elon looked out his office window at the sprawling city below. The future still seemed daunting, but now it felt more within reach than ever before. The dream hadn't died, it had simply changed. And maybe that was the key to everything. The journey was far from over. The next few months were a whirlwind of new strategies and shifting priorities. Elon Musk had taken a step back, rethinking his approach to leadership, and his teams had responded in ways he hadn't anticipated. For the first time in a long time, there was a sense of unity at Tesla and SpaceX. People weren't just working for him anymore, they were working with him, and for the first time, the burden didn't feel so heavy. The first noticeable change came in Tesla. Elon made a point to visit the factories more often, but not in his usual whirlwind style. This time, he was there to listen, to understand, and to collaborate with his employees. He walked through the assembly lines, stopping to chat with engineers, technicians, and even floor workers. He took the time to listen to their ideas, their concerns, and their hopes for the company's future. It wasn't about forcing his vision onto them anymore, it was about creating a vision that they could all share. Elon was surprised at how much he learned in those conversations. He realized that while he had been pushing toward the future, he had overlooked the importance of the people who were actually building that future. It wasn't enough to just focus on the end goal. The process, the people, the day-to-day work, all of it mattered. And by allowing his employees to feel more ownership in the mission, he started to see a shift in morale. SpaceX, too, was changing. The pressure had been immense, and the Starship program had faced significant setbacks, but under Elon's renewed leadership style, the company started to adopt a more collaborative approach. Engineers and astronauts were given more autonomy, and the atmosphere became one of shared responsibility rather than a singular, top-down directive. The results weren't instantaneous, but there was a noticeable shift in attitude. For the first time, the team felt like a cohesive unit working toward a common goal. Elon had learned an important lesson over the past few months: leadership wasn't about being the loudest voice in the room or the one with all the answers. It was about empowering others, allowing them to step into their own brilliance, and trusting that together, the team could reach new heights. He wasn't the lone visionary anymore. He was part of a larger, more dynamic collective, each person contributing to the success of the dream. But even with all the positive changes, there were still challenges on the horizon. Tesla's stock was stabilizing, but it wasn't back to its previous highs. SpaceX had made significant progress with Starship, but there were still many test flights to go before they could launch humans to Mars. And, most pressingly, Elon had to deal with the increasing scrutiny from the media and the public. People were still skeptical. Investors, competitors, and critics questioned whether Elon could truly change the world. They pointed to his failures, his missed timelines, his lofty promises, and asked if he was still capable of delivering on his vision. It was a constant barrage of doubt, but this time, something had shifted inside Elon. He didn't feel the need to answer to them in the same way he once did. He had his team, he had his vision, and he had learned the importance of patience. Success would come, but it wouldn't be rushed. It couldn't be. One evening, Elon sat at his desk in SpaceX's headquarters, reviewing the latest reports. His mind wasn't on the numbers. Instead, it was focused on the journey. The decision to pull back, to take a step back and listen, had been a turning point for him personally and professionally. He reflected on the moments of doubt he had felt, the moments when it seemed like the weight of his ambition was too much to bear. He thought about how close he had come to giving up, how the pressure had almost crushed him. But then, he remembered the people who had stuck by him. The engineers at Tesla, the astronauts at SpaceX, the workers in the factories, they were all a part of this journey. They had believed in him, even when he had lost faith in himself. They had stood by him, and now, together, they were starting to build something that could truly change the world. He stood up from his desk and walked to the window. The city lights stretched out before him, a sprawling web of possibility. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel afraid. He felt calm, focused, even. There was still so much work to be done, but he had a renewed sense of purpose. His mission hadn't changed. But his understanding of how to achieve it had evolved. As Elon looked out over the city, a thought crossed his mind. Maybe it wasn't about getting to Mars first or building the world's most advanced electric car. Maybe the real goal was something simpler, something more profound. Perhaps the true purpose of all this, the reason he had sacrificed so much, the reason he had pushed so hard, was to make people believe that the impossible could be done. To make them believe that anything was possible if they were willing to work together, to trust each other, and to never give up on their dreams. The journey wasn't just about technology or space exploration. It was about humanity, about how we can rise above our limitations and work together to achieve something greater than ourselves. Elon smiled, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He didn't have all the answers, and there were still countless obstacles ahead. But for the first time in a long time, he knew that he was on the right path. As the days passed, things continued to improve. Tesla's production numbers began to rise steadily, and SpaceX's Starship program achieved one successful test flight after another. The world was beginning to take notice once again. But this time, Elon wasn't chasing approval. He wasn't fighting for validation. He was simply living his truth, working with the team he trusted, and continuing to push toward a future he believed in. There were still challenges ahead, of course. Elon knew that. The road to Mars would not be easy, and the future of electric cars would require constant innovation and adaptation. But one thing was certain, Elon Musk had found a new clarity. He had rediscovered the heart of his mission, and he was ready to face whatever came next, this time, with a stronger, more united team by his side. The journey was far from over. And while the world would continue to watch, Elon was no longer concerned with their doubts. He had learned the most important lesson of all: the future belongs to those who are willing to risk everything, but more importantly, to those who know how to rise above the struggles and move forward together. With that thought, Elon turned away from the window and walked back to his desk. His phone buzzed with a new notification. It was a message from his chief engineer at SpaceX. Another successful test. Another step forward. Elon smiled. The journey was just beginning. As spring settled into the year, the momentum that had begun to build at SpaceX and Tesla was palpable. The mood was more optimistic, and there was a renewed sense of purpose within both companies. But while there was progress, there was still a long way to go, and Elon Musk knew that. The road ahead was long and filled with obstacles, but the turning point had already occurred, the shift in his leadership approach. It wasn't about being the sole visionary anymore, it was about harnessing the collective strength of everyone around him. At Tesla, Elon had started to see the fruits of his more collaborative approach. The factory floor, once an environment marked by stress and pressure, was now a place where workers felt valued. Ideas that had once been dismissed as impractical were now being discussed openly in meetings. Some of those ideas had already started making their way into the next generation of Tesla vehicles. New battery technologies, more efficient manufacturing processes, and innovative safety features were being integrated into designs that were set to change the future of electric transportation. One of the most significant advancements came when Tesla's team achieved a breakthrough in their battery technology, significantly extending the range of their vehicles. This was the result of months of research, late nights, and a willingness to trust the team to experiment with new ideas. Elon was thrilled by the news, not because it validated his vision of an electric future, but because it showed the power of working together. For SpaceX, the challenges were even more pronounced. The goal of sending humans to Mars was still years away, and despite the progress with Starship, there were still many hurdles to overcome: technical, logistical, and financial. Yet Elon, for the first time in years, wasn't focused on rushing the process. He understood the importance of getting it right. Starship's test flights had been successful, but there were still refinements to be made. With every launch, the company was learning more, not just about the technology but about what it would take to make humanity's dream of becoming a multiplanetary species a reality. Yet, even with this success, there were skeptics. The media remained wary, with some analysts claiming that Musk's vision for Mars was unrealistic, suggesting that he was more interested in being a legend than solving the problems that existed here on Earth. While those comments once would have enraged Elon, he found himself at peace now. He had learned to take the criticism in stride, knowing that many of the world's most visionary ideas were initially laughed at or dismissed. After all, wasn't that how SpaceX itself had started? With ridicule, with uncertainty, and with people wondering if it was all just a pipe dream? Elon smiled as he thought about it. The same doubts that had dogged him in the early years of SpaceX were now fueling the fire of his ambition. But this time, he wasn't carrying the burden alone. The team, his team, had become his greatest strength. However, no journey this transformative came without its share of sacrifices. Elon's personal life, as always, seemed to be caught in a tug-of-war between his dreams and his reality. The complexities of balancing a family with a global empire weighed on him more than ever. His relationships with his children, especially his older ones, had grown distant over the years. The demands of running two of the most ambitious companies in the world had kept him from being present in their lives as much as he would have liked. He found himself contemplating these sacrifices more and more as he sat alone in his office late at night. The hum of the SpaceX building, the quiet clatter of keyboards and phones in the background, seemed distant compared to the thoughts swirling in his mind. His personal life had always been a secondary priority to his professional ambitions, but lately, that had begun to feel like a mistake. Elon had always believed that he could have it all, that he could change the world while being a good father and partner. But over the years, the lines between work and personal life had blurred to the point where he was no longer sure how to fix them. The passion that had once been directed toward his children and family now often seemed scattered between the teams at SpaceX, Tesla, and his other ventures. How could he be present for them when he was so consumed by everything else? But as he sat there in the quiet, staring at the blueprints of Starship on his desk, a thought struck him. Maybe the first step toward true balance was embracing the idea that it wasn't all or nothing. He had always thought of himself as a leader who needed to be everywhere, doing everything. But perhaps that wasn't the right approach. Maybe, for the first time, he could allow himself to step back from the constant rush, to give himself permission to show up fully, not just in his work, but in his personal life, too. The realization wasn't an easy one. It would require vulnerability, a willingness to change something that had been ingrained in him for so long. But it was a crucial step if he was going to maintain any semblance of balance in his life. The work was important, of course, but so was the family that had always been there, even when he had overlooked them. The next day, Elon called a family meeting. It was a rare occasion, one that none of his children could remember him ever doing before. He sat down with his eldest sons and explained the changes he had been going through, the reflection he had been doing on his leadership, his ambition, and how, moving forward, he wanted to be more present for them. He told them that he couldn't change the past, but he was committed to being a better father, one who would take the time to listen to their hopes, their dreams, and their needs. It wasn't a magical solution. There were no guarantees that things would immediately get better, and there were still challenges ahead. But for the first time, Elon felt like he was on the right path, not just as a leader of companies, but as a father and a person. The following months saw a continued balance between Elon's business endeavors and his personal growth. At SpaceX, the progress was undeniable. Starship's upcoming test flight was nearing, and the team was more prepared than ever. They had learned so much from their previous tests and were cautiously optimistic that this flight would bring them one step closer to the ultimate goal, Mars. At Tesla, the positive changes continued to ripple through the company. Production was ramping up, and the battery breakthrough was paving the way for even more innovation. The team felt more united than ever, and Elon's influence had evolved from that of a distant, demanding boss to that of a supportive, visionary leader. As the night fell over SpaceX headquarters, Elon sat in his office, looking out at the sprawling city below. There was still so much to do. The road ahead was long, filled with twists and turns. But now, he felt a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. He wasn't just building a company. He was building a future for himself, his family, his companies, and, ultimately, for humanity. He had come a long way. And while the journey was far from over, Elon knew that the turning point had already happened. Tomorrow, the journey would continue. The next few months were filled with unexpected developments. After the family meeting, Elon felt a deeper connection with his children and was determined to not let work consume all his time. He made a conscious effort to balance his responsibilities, giving more time to family, while still maintaining the relentless pace that had driven his success at Tesla and SpaceX. However, despite his best efforts, the reality of his world remained a never-ending whirlwind of innovation, risk, and deadlines. It was an early morning when Elon received a call that would mark the beginning of the next phase of his journey. SpaceX was preparing for another key test flight of the Starship prototype. This time, the stakes were higher than ever. If the test was successful, it would signal a major leap forward for both SpaceX and humanity's ambitions to reach Mars. The world would be watching. The pressure was immense, but Elon felt a calm that had eluded him for years. There was something different in the air now. His transformation as a leader had come at just the right time. As the test flight approached, Elon found himself reflecting on the path that had brought him here. He had gone from being a young, ambitious entrepreneur with little more than a dream to becoming the founder of two of the most powerful companies in the world. SpaceX had gone from a small, struggling startup to the leader in private space exploration. Tesla had revolutionized the electric vehicle industry. But, as proud as he was of these accomplishments, he couldn't help but wonder what lay ahead. His mind often wandered to the larger questions, the ones that went beyond rockets and cars. He thought about his initial vision for humanity. A future where humans lived on multiple planets, where technology was used to improve life, and where innovation could solve even the most intractable problems. He had faced criticism, ridicule, and doubt, yet the spark of that original vision had never faded. In fact, it had grown stronger. Now, as the test date approached, the burden of responsibility had never felt heavier. It wasn't just about the success of SpaceX. It wasn't just about Mars. It was about the future. The future of humanity. His legacy. And it was a weight he wasn't sure he could carry alone. In the days leading up to the test flight, Elon spent more time at the SpaceX facility than he had in years. His presence there was no longer just about overseeing operations. He found himself connecting more with his engineers, asking questions, seeking their input, and sharing his thoughts openly. He had changed, and his approach to leadership had changed with him. This new phase of leadership was not about him being the genius in the room with all the answers, it was about fostering a culture of collaboration and inclusion. He spent hours in the testing facilities, watching his engineers fine-tune Starship. He marveled at their work, their dedication, and their resilience. In the past, he would have been quick to take charge, to push for progress at any cost. But now, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the team that had come together to make this moment possible. Elon had learned an important lesson: the best leaders don't just create change, they inspire it. By empowering those around him, he had cultivated an environment where ideas could flourish and where everyone was motivated to push the boundaries of what was possible. And, as the countdown to launch day began, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride for what they had accomplished together. Launch day arrived, and the tension was palpable. The entire SpaceX team had gathered to watch the test flight, and Elon stood at the forefront with a calm expression on his face. He had done everything he could to prepare for this moment, but the reality of the unknown still loomed large. As the countdown clock ticked down, Elon's thoughts turned inward. The pressure of this moment was immense. If this test failed, the consequences would be severe, not just for SpaceX, but for his vision of humanity's future in space. The eyes of the world were on them, and everything seemed to hinge on this one moment. But instead of fear, he felt a strange sense of peace. He had come to terms with the unpredictability of the path ahead. And he had learned that sometimes, the best thing to do was to let go and trust in the team. As the rocket roared to life and blasted into the sky, Elon couldn't help but smile. The flight was flawless. The team had done it. Starship was on its way to orbit. The cheers that erupted in the control room were deafening. The team had succeeded, and Elon felt the weight of the past few years lift off his shoulders. This wasn't just a victory for SpaceX. It was a victory for everyone who had ever doubted him, for everyone who had questioned whether his dreams could ever become a reality. For the first time, Elon Musk allowed himself to feel the full weight of the moment. The dream of making life multiplanetary was one step closer to reality. And in that moment, Elon realized that his vision had never been about him. It had never been about building rockets or electric cars. It had always been about something bigger, a vision of hope, of possibility, of a future where humans could reach for the stars. As the days passed, the success of the test flight was celebrated in the media. The headlines were filled with praise, and SpaceX's stock saw a significant increase. The critics who had once ridiculed Elon now had to acknowledge that his vision was no longer a pipe dream. His companies were reshaping the world. But even in the face of this newfound success, Elon knew that the road ahead would be anything but easy. The next steps for SpaceX and Tesla would be crucial. The Starship program was still in its infancy, and there were many more hurdles to overcome before the first human mission to Mars could take place. At Tesla, the race to dominate the electric vehicle market was still on, with fierce competition from established automakers and new startups. Elon wasn't naive about the challenges. He understood that the success of one test flight wasn't the end, it was just the beginning of something much larger. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of contentment. The journey was no longer about achieving success for success's sake. It was about something deeper. It was about the world he was helping to build, the people he was inspiring, and the future he was creating for generations to come. That evening, as Elon stood on the balcony of his home, gazing up at the stars, he thought about the journey that had brought him here. The hardships, the sacrifices, the moments of doubt. All of it had led him to this point. And for the first time in years, he felt a profound sense of peace. The path ahead was still uncertain. There were still battles to fight, failures to endure, and obstacles to overcome. But Elon Musk had come to understand one crucial truth: the future wasn't just about achieving the impossible, it was about inspiring others to believe that the impossible was possible. With that thought, Elon turned and went inside. The journey was far from over, but he was ready for whatever lay ahead. And so, the winds of change continued to blow, carrying Elon Musk and his team toward the horizon of a new world, one where the sky was no longer the limit. The success of Starship's test flight had shaken the world, but for Elon Musk, it was just one chapter in the grand narrative he had been writing for decades. The headlines that followed the test were filled with praise, as SpaceX had officially taken a significant step toward humanity becoming a multiplanetary species. Yet as the world celebrated, Elon found himself reflecting on what this victory meant for the future. What did it mean for humanity, for his companies, and, perhaps most importantly, for him? Standing in the SpaceX control room, surrounded by the team who had helped turn his dream into reality, Elon felt a rare sense of humility. He had been the driving force behind this moment, yes, but this wasn't his victory alone. It was the victory of every engineer, every worker, every person who had believed in him when the odds were stacked against them. In the past, he would have reveled in the spotlight, taking credit for the moment. But now, with everything he had learned about leadership and the power of collaboration, he stood there, quietly acknowledging the collective effort. Despite his introspective mood, the world was moving fast around him. The demands of his position, CEO of two companies at the forefront of technological revolution, never ceased. Tesla, now the dominant player in the electric vehicle market, was entering a new phase of growth. The production lines were humming at full capacity, with new models, such as the Cybertruck, ready to make their debut. Competition was fierce, with other manufacturers scrambling to catch up, but Elon had a firm belief that Tesla's technological edge and commitment to sustainability would set it apart. However, just as SpaceX's success had been the result of years of trial and error, Tesla's growth had come with its own set of challenges. Production delays, supply chain issues, and regulatory hurdles had made running the company difficult at times. Yet, each obstacle was met with a relentless drive to innovate and push past the limits. Elon had learned to embrace these struggles, to understand that the path to success was never linear. But it wasn't just the business side of things that Elon was focused on. In the wake of Starship's triumph, he began to grapple more deeply with the larger implications of his work. He had always been obsessed with the idea of pushing humanity forward. But as he looked to the future, he couldn't help but wonder if the mission he had embarked on was about more than just the advancement of technology. One night, as Elon sat in his office at Tesla, overlooking the city of Palo Alto, he thought about his legacy. The success of his companies, the innovation, and the billions he had amassed, none of it mattered if it didn't serve a greater purpose. He had started out on this journey with a clear goal, to reduce humanity's dependence on fossil fuels and to make life interplanetary. But as time passed, he realized that the true legacy wasn't just in the vehicles he built or the rockets he launched. It was in the mindset he was creating. Elon knew that the real shift wasn't just about technology. It was about changing the way people thought about the future. It was about inspiring people to dream bigger, to think beyond the limits of what was possible. To him, the greatest accomplishment would be a world where people no longer saw space exploration as a distant dream but as an imminent reality. A world where sustainability wasn't just an ideal but a way of life. He smiled to himself as he thought about how far he had come. When he started, no one believed in him. He had been dismissed as a dreamer, a man chasing fantasies. Now, he was on the verge of making the impossible possible. But that didn't mean the challenges were over. Far from it. A few weeks later, Elon found himself in a meeting with Tesla's leadership team. The discussion was focused on the company's next big move, full self-driving cars. Despite the technological advances that Tesla had made, the world had yet to see the kind of revolutionary leap that Elon had promised. While other automakers were making strides in autonomous vehicles, Elon's vision of a fully automated fleet was still far from realization. But that was the way Elon worked. He wasn't satisfied with incremental progress. He wanted breakthroughs. He wanted to leap forward, to break barriers, to shatter expectations. "We've got the hardware," Elon said, his voice steady but filled with intensity. "The software is coming along. What we need now is execution. We need to push forward and make this happen. We're not just going to create another self-driving car. We're going to change the way people think about transportation." As the meeting progressed, Elon's words echoed in the minds of those in the room. Tesla's focus wasn't just on electric vehicles anymore, it was about reshaping the entire transportation ecosystem. They were working on projects that ranged from autonomous delivery trucks to new ways of integrating renewable energy into people's lives. Despite the challenges, Elon felt a sense of urgency. The world was changing, and Tesla had the potential to lead the charge. But he also understood that innovation was never a guarantee. The market was unpredictable, and Tesla's competitors were growing fiercer by the day. But with that urgency came a renewed sense of purpose. He had experienced the highs and lows of the business world, and the lesson was clear: the road to greatness was filled with setbacks and disappointments. Yet it was those moments of failure that made the eventual victories so much sweeter. Every setback was a learning opportunity, and Elon had mastered the art of bouncing back stronger. Elon's thoughts were interrupted by a call from Gwynne Shotwell, SpaceX's president and COO. There was a problem with one of the upcoming test flights for Starship, technical difficulties with the engines. The timing couldn't have been worse. A delay could set the mission back months, potentially jeopardizing SpaceX's timeline for its first crewed mission to Mars. Elon listened intently as Gwynne outlined the issues. His mind raced, but he remained calm. This wasn't the first problem he had faced at SpaceX. It certainly wouldn't be the last. But this was different. This was the most important mission they had ever undertaken. The stakes had never been higher. "Let's figure this out," Elon said, his voice resolute. "We're not backing down now. We fix the issues, and we move forward." It was in moments like these that Elon's true nature as a leader was revealed. He wasn't someone who sought the easy road. He was someone who thrived on solving the impossible problems, taking on the challenges that others feared. And that, he knew, was the key to success. It wasn't just about the destination, it was about the journey, the process of pushing forward even when everything seemed stacked against you. As the day wore on, Elon's resolve only grew stronger. The test flight would proceed, and SpaceX would overcome this obstacle, just as they had with every other setback they had faced. Elon Musk was no stranger to adversity, and he had no intention of letting it stop him now. Later that evening, as Elon sat alone in his office, he looked out the window at the darkened sky. His mind was still racing, but there was an odd sense of calm in the air. The weight of the legacy he was building, the weight of the future, had been heavy for so long. But now, for the first time, he understood something. The legacy wasn't in the individual milestones. It wasn't in the achievements or the accolades. The legacy was in the shift in how people thought about the world. The shift in how they saw the future. Elon had always dreamed of making life interplanetary, of reducing humanity's dependence on fossil fuels, of creating a world where technology and sustainability went hand in hand. But now, as he sat there in his office, he realized that his greatest legacy wouldn't be the rockets he launched or the cars he built. It would be the vision he inspired in others. It would be the spark that lit the fire in countless others, driving them to push the boundaries of what was possible. And with that realization, Elon felt a sense of peace he had never experienced before. The road ahead was still uncertain, but one thing was clear: his journey had only just begun. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The following weeks after the test flight were a whirlwind of activity. As SpaceX made final preparations for the next big milestone, Elon Musk found himself caught between two powerful forces. On one side, his work at SpaceX and Tesla demanded more of his attention than ever. On the other, he could feel the weight of the personal changes he had been undergoing. The balance between family, work, and his larger vision for the future of humanity had never felt more precarious. Elon was no stranger to stress. He had lived in the eye of a storm for most of his life: high expectations, relentless deadlines, the constant need to prove that his audacious visions were not just dreams, but achievable goals. But now, more than ever, he was feeling the strain. His work was at the forefront of technological revolution, but he couldn't ignore the subtle undercurrent of dissatisfaction that was growing within him. One quiet evening in late spring, as the golden sun began to set over the SpaceX headquarters, Elon sat alone in his office, staring at the papers scattered across his desk. The launch schedule for Starship, Tesla's new ventures, and the growing demands of his other projects loomed before him. For years, Elon had been a man on a mission, an almost obsessive pursuit of a future that was both sustainable and interplanetary. But lately, something had shifted. The long hours, the constant pressure to innovate, to lead, to succeed, had it all been worth it? Elon's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. He turned to see Gwyn Shotwell standing in the doorway, her expression serious but calm. "Mind if I come in?" she asked, holding up a folder of documents. "Of course," Elon replied, gesturing for her to take a seat. Gwyn set the folder on the desk, and without skipping a beat, she began speaking. "We've hit a snag with the Starship test schedule. The engineers are suggesting that we push the next flight back by several months to address some new design issues. I know that's not ideal, but we'll need to take the time to make sure everything's right before we proceed." Elon leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. How many more delays can we afford before people start losing faith in us? The world is watching, Gwyn. If we keep pushing these timelines back, we might lose the momentum we've gained. Gwyn nodded. "I understand the pressure. But we also can't afford to sacrifice safety or quality for speed. This is bigger than one mission. We need to get it right." Elon stared at the folder, deep in thought. He had been wrestling with his own doubts about his ability to continue to manage everything. SpaceX, Tesla, Neuralink, the boring company, he had so many balls in the air, and the weight was starting to feel unbearable. But he couldn't shake the feeling that if he stopped now, the world would pass him by. He had a responsibility to humanity's future, a future that demanded bold, relentless action. "Okay," Elon finally said, his voice steady. "We delay the test flight, but we set a firm new timeline. We'll make sure everything is in place." "I don't want another setback." Gwyn smiled. "That's the spirit I expect from you." As she left, Elon was left alone with his thoughts once more. The responsibility he carried was overwhelming. The road to Mars, the electric future he envisioned, all the projects that would change the course of humanity, it was all on his shoulders. But in that silence, a troubling realization began to set in. Was it all worth it? Elon spent the next few days immersed in his work, constantly bouncing between meetings, test reviews, and strategy sessions. Yet, no matter how hard he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. His children were growing up fast, and the time he had with them seemed to shrink by the day. He had missed too many school plays, birthday parties, and quiet evenings at home. His mind wandered back to his family, what had once been the cornerstone of his drive. In the midst of his latest conference call, Elon received a text from his ex-wife, Tallulah. She had sent him a picture of their children at a weekend picnic, looking happy and carefree, something that tugged at his heart. It was a reminder of what he had left behind in his pursuit of greatness. And in that moment, Elon realized he had lost sight of the balance he so desperately needed. Was all the progress worth the sacrifices? Was this relentless drive truly in service of his family, or was he simply perpetuating a cycle of isolation? Later that day, as he returned home after a long meeting, Elon couldn't help but reflect on the personal toll his career had taken on him. He was aware of the media portrayals of him, an eccentric billionaire genius, a visionary determined to save the world. But behind the headlines, behind the ambitious goals and massive successes, there was a man who felt disconnected, overwhelmed, and at times, profoundly alone. That evening, after a quiet dinner, Elon sat down with his children, Griffin and Xavier, and they talked. It wasn't about rockets or cars. It wasn't about the future of humanity. It was about them. They wanted to know about his childhood, his adventures, his dreams, and his fears. And for the first time in a long while, Elon opened up. He talked to them not as a CEO, not as an icon, but as a father. It was then that he made a promise to himself. No matter how important the work, no matter how much the world relied on him, he would no longer sacrifice the precious moments with his family. His legacy needed to be more than just the businesses he built, it needed to be the relationships he nurtured. And it was time for a change. The next day, after an especially challenging meeting with Tesla's executive team, Elon took a step back. He called a meeting with Gwynne Shotwell and Jim Farley, Tesla's new chief of production, and set the tone for the next phase of his leadership. "I've been thinking a lot about the future," Elon began, pacing in front of the whiteboard. "We've accomplished a lot. But we've also lost something along the way. My commitment to making humanity a multiplanetary species and to transitioning the world to sustainable energy remains unwavering. But I need to make sure I'm leading in a way that's sustainable for me, for my family, and for the teams we've built. No more late nights. No more burnout." Gwynne and Jim exchanged a glance, but they knew this was coming. Elon was never one to shy away from hard decisions. "I'm still committed to these companies," he continued, "but I'm shifting my focus. We need to be more collaborative. We need to empower the teams to take ownership of projects. I want to ensure that we keep innovating, but in a way that's healthy, balanced, and sustainable." The shift was subtle, but the message was clear. Elon wasn't backing down from his vision, but he was changing the way he approached leadership. It was a shift toward a more hands-off, empowering style. It was about trust. Trusting his people to carry forward the mission he had started, trusting that his companies could succeed without his constant oversight. That night, Elon sat alone in his study, looking out at the stars. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace. The journey ahead was uncertain, and the weight of the world was still on his shoulders, but something had changed within him. The mission was bigger than him. And he knew now that it wasn't just about the work. It was about balance. It was about leading not only with ambition but with heart. And as he stood up to head to bed, he realized that the road ahead, though filled with challenges, was one he no longer had to walk alone. The future was uncertain, but it was a future that Elon Musk was ready to embrace, both as a visionary and as a father. The days following Elon's decision to reassess his leadership style and balance his life began to shift the dynamic at both SpaceX and Tesla. In the midst of continuing his work, Elon made a conscious effort to be more present. He still attended high-level meetings and strategic sessions, but he delegated more responsibility to his trusted leadership teams. For the first time in years, he began to feel less like a single, solitary force driving everything forward, and more like part of a larger, collective vision. At SpaceX, Gwynne Shotwell's steady leadership was beginning to take even more center stage. Jim Farley, Tesla's new chief of production, took the reins in managing the day-to-day operations. The shift was subtle but effective. Elon's presence was still felt, his ideas were still driving the company forward, but there was a newfound sense of autonomy within the teams he had spent so much time building. One afternoon, Elon found himself on a video call with his children. They were back at home in Texas, and this time, the call wasn't about work. It wasn't about rockets or cars or the future of technology. It was about them. Griffin and Xavier had been asking more questions lately, not just about their father's work, but about how they could make an impact in the world. "I think you're already doing it," Elon said, smiling. "You don't need to be a billionaire or a rocket scientist to change the world. Sometimes, it's the little things, being kind, helping someone out, standing up for what's right, that really matter." His words felt heavy with a sense of purpose. For years, Elon had been driven by a need to make a big, lasting impact. But now, he understood that change wasn't always about grand gestures or big breakthroughs. Sometimes, it was about the everyday choices, the way you treated the people around you. And he was beginning to feel that he had overlooked this important part of life for too long. As the call ended and the kids said their goodbyes, Elon sat back in his chair and reflected. Maybe he had been so caught up in his quest for space exploration and sustainability that he had neglected the simple joys of life. He had always believed in the importance of having a bold vision, but now he saw that a vision wasn't just about doing something extraordinary, it was about living in a way that others could follow and be inspired by. Meanwhile, at Tesla, production lines were humming with activity. The Cybertruck was getting closer to its official launch, and demand for Tesla's vehicles was higher than ever. Yet, despite the success, Elon could feel a subtle shift in the company's atmosphere. The culture he had so carefully cultivated, one of innovation, disruption, and urgency, was beginning to stabilize. He saw it in the teams, in the way people interacted with one another, and in the pride they took in their work. Tesla was no longer just a company, it had become a movement. Elon was still very much involved in the vision for the company, but his role was changing. He was beginning to think less about the day-to-day operations and more about the larger vision he had for the future. He had long understood that the transition to sustainable energy was not just about electric cars. It was about changing the way the world produced and consumed energy. Energy should be abundant, clean, and affordable for everyone, he had said time and time again. But now, more than ever, that mission felt like an imperative. It wasn't just about making Tesla profitable, it was about reshaping the way humanity interacted with energy. And then there was the question of autonomy. Elon's vision for fully autonomous vehicles had been a constant goal. Tesla's vehicles had advanced to the point where self-driving features were becoming more and more capable, but full autonomy was still on the horizon. In this new era of leadership, Elon knew that pushing his team to reach that goal, while giving them the space to innovate without feeling micromanaged, was key. The next major turning point came when Elon was invited to speak at an international summit on sustainability. The summit was attended by world leaders, industry experts, and activists, all focused on the future of energy, climate change, and technology. Elon knew that his participation would place him at the forefront of global conversations on these issues, but he also saw it as an opportunity to shift the narrative around his work. In the past, his speeches had been about the big ideas, colonizing Mars, building electric cars, revolutionizing space travel. But now, he saw a new opportunity, to talk about the importance of collaboration. He had always been a lone visionary, but he realized that the world needed more than just a singular force driving change. The solutions to the world's problems would not come from one person, one company, or one country, they would come from a collective effort. Elon's speech at the summit was a departure from his usual rhetoric. He still spoke passionately about the need for humanity to move toward a sustainable future, but he also emphasized the importance of working together to solve the world's most pressing challenges. The future of humanity is not about one company, one person, or one nation, he said to a captivated audience. It's about all of us working together, pushing each other to innovate, to think bigger, and to make sure that the changes we create benefit everyone. His words resonated with the crowd, and for the first time in a long while, Elon felt that the pressure to carry the world on his shoulders had lifted, even just a little. Perhaps it wasn't about pushing harder or faster, it was about pushing together. That night, as he reflected on his speech and the conversations he had had with leaders from around the world, Elon found himself feeling a new sense of hope. For so long, he had thought that in order to change the world, he needed to do it all himself. But now, he understood that the real change would come when people from all walks of life came together, united by a common vision. This was the next phase of his journey, redefining what leadership meant, not just for his companies, but for his life. It wasn't about doing everything alone. It was about creating an ecosystem where innovation, sustainability, and collaboration could thrive. As he sat by the window in his hotel room, looking out at the lights of the city below, Elon smiled to himself. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in years, he felt ready for whatever came next. His journey was far from over. It was only just beginning. When Elon returned to California, he began laying the groundwork for his new vision, one where SpaceX, Tesla, and all his ventures would operate not just as isolated entities, but as interconnected forces working toward the same goal, a sustainable, interplanetary future for humanity. He would no longer be the sole driver of innovation. He would be the guide, empowering those around him to take the lead. And in that empowerment, Elon Musk began to see a future that was brighter, more collaborative, and more achievable than ever before. The future was no longer just about Mars or electric cars. It was about a new way of thinking, a way that had the potential to unite the world and change it for the better. Elon knew that his legacy wasn't just in the technologies he created, but in the mindset he fostered. The greatest change, he now realized, was not in the world he was building, but in the people he was inspiring to build it with him. Elon Musk had always thrived on disruption. Whether it was with Tesla, SpaceX, or any of his other ventures, his approach had been to challenge conventional wisdom, to break barriers and leap beyond limits. But in the months following the summit on sustainability, a new kind of disruption was brewing in his mind, not the kind that broke down walls, but the kind that built bridges. The idea of collaboration had slowly crept into his psyche, and now it felt like the natural next step in his evolution as a leader. He had been so focused on the big, audacious goals, the ones that would shape the future of humanity, but he was beginning to see that the future didn't belong to any one company or person. It belonged to everyone. The first test of this new mindset came when Elon hosted a roundtable discussion with a variety of thought leaders from different industries. He wanted to create an environment where innovative minds could come together to share ideas freely. The goal wasn't to discuss what SpaceX or Tesla could achieve on their own, it was to look beyond the confines of any single industry and consider the bigger picture of how technology, sustainability, and collaboration could intersect in unexpected ways. As the meeting began, Elon looked around the table. There were engineers, environmental activists, venture capitalists, and even artists. The diversity of the group was intentional. Elon had come to understand that innovation wasn't just about technological breakthroughs, it was about fostering creativity and fresh thinking from all corners of society. I've spent most of my career pushing towards a specific vision, Elon began, looking each person in the eye. But now, I'm starting to believe that no one person or organization can tackle the massive challenges we face alone. We need to be thinking bigger. We need to find new ways of working together, across industries, across countries, and even across disciplines. The room was quiet as the weight of his words sank in. Everyone knew how much Elon had accomplished, how many incredible feats he had achieved on his own. But hearing him speak with such humility was a reminder that even the greatest innovators had their limits. What made Elon different, however, was his ability to learn and grow, even in the face of success. I'm here today to start a new kind of conversation, he continued. One where we all bring something to the table. No egos. No competition. Just a shared commitment to changing the world, for the better. The discussion that followed was unlike any meeting Elon had ever hosted. Ideas flowed freely, from breakthrough solutions in renewable energy to new ways of fostering equitable access to technology. There were talks about combining the power of AI with green technologies, creating sustainable cities that ran entirely on clean energy, and even developing new methods for recycling materials that could be repurposed in space exploration. It was a mind-expanding conversation, the kind that Elon had always dreamed of, but never quite expected to see. As the meeting came to a close, Elon felt a sense of exhilaration he hadn't experienced in a long time. This was the future. A future where everyone, no matter their background or expertise, could contribute to solving the biggest problems humanity faced. But while the roundtable discussion had been enlightening, it also served as a stark reminder, change wouldn't happen overnight. There were still significant hurdles to overcome. The world was still deeply entrenched in old ways of thinking, where competition was often seen as more valuable than collaboration. Governments, corporations, and even individuals clung to the notion that success was a zero-sum game, where one person's win was another's loss. Elon knew that shifting this mindset would be one of the biggest challenges of his life. The next step in this journey of connection came when Elon took a trip to the United Nations. He had been invited to give a keynote speech at a climate change summit, and this was his chance to take the ideas he had discussed at the roundtable to a global stage. Elon's vision of collaboration was about to take its most significant step forward. As he stood at the podium in front of world leaders, environmental advocates, and policymakers, Elon knew that his words could have far-reaching consequences. This wasn't about selling a product or even advocating for his companies. This was about making a larger point, that humanity's greatest challenges could only be solved through collective action. Elon Musk is known for launching rockets and electric cars, he began, pausing as he scanned the room. But today, I'm here to talk about something different. I'm here to talk about how we, as a global community, can solve the climate crisis, not as separate nations, not as individual corporations, but as one united force. He spoke about the need for a global energy network that could provide clean power to every corner of the earth. He talked about the importance of shifting from fossil fuels to renewable energy sources and the role that technology and innovation could play in achieving that goal. And most importantly, he called for a new era of collaboration. We can no longer afford to act in isolation, Elon continued. We need to build connections between industries, between governments, and between people. If we want to avoid the worst impacts of climate change, we need to act together, now. The speech was met with a standing ovation, but Elon knew that words alone wouldn't change anything. It was action that mattered. In the weeks that followed, he began pushing forward with a series of initiatives aimed at fostering greater collaboration across industries. SpaceX and Tesla began forming partnerships with companies in fields they had never previously collaborated with, from agriculture to medicine to education. At Tesla, engineers were working with environmental scientists to develop ways to make solar energy more accessible and efficient. SpaceX was reaching out to space agencies around the world to share their technology and knowledge, with the aim of creating a more unified space exploration effort. And through it all, Elon's leadership style was evolving. He wasn't simply the visionary anymore, he was the facilitator, the connector. He had come to understand that innovation didn't just come from the top down. It came from the intersections of ideas, where different sectors, people, and cultures could meet and collaborate. As the months passed, it became clear that Elon Musk's vision for collaboration was gaining traction. SpaceX's partnerships with international space agencies had led to new breakthroughs in rocket technology, while Tesla's focus on sustainable energy had inspired other companies to follow suit. And the ripple effect of his speech at the United Nations was being felt across the globe. But perhaps the most profound change was within Elon himself. The man who had once been obsessed with doing it all alone, with carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, had evolved into a leader who understood the true power of connection. He had learned that the greatest disruption wasn't in breaking barriers, it was in tearing down the walls that separated people and ideas, and building bridges instead. And so, with his renewed sense of purpose, Elon Musk set his sights on a new challenge, not just to change industries or reshape the future, but to unite the world in a shared vision for the future, a future that would be brighter and more sustainable, if only humanity could work together. Elon knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks, challenges, and resistance. But now, he was certain of one thing, the future was something that could only be built together. The world was changing faster than ever, and Elon Musk found himself standing at the intersection of two distinct paths, one leading toward the familiar, his companies continuing to push boundaries in space exploration and sustainable energy, the other, a road less traveled, one that led toward greater collaboration, global unity, and shared progress. It was a challenge for him, a challenge that he knew would require not just new thinking, but a new way of being. Elon had always been a trailblazer, but now he faced the difficult realization that the path to change wasn't always clear-cut. The ambitious projects and ventures that had defined his career were moving forward at breakneck speed. Tesla's Cybertruck was nearing production, SpaceX had successfully launched another mission to Mars, and Neuralink's research into brain-computer interfaces had made significant strides. But beneath the surface, something was changing within Elon. He had once believed that the speed of progress was the most important factor, that if he could just push harder, innovate faster, the world would catch up. But now, with the global challenges facing humanity, he was beginning to see the truth: change couldn't be forced. It had to be nurtured. And more importantly, it had to be done together. One evening, Elon sat alone in his office at SpaceX headquarters, his fingers drumming against the desk as he stared out at the sprawling expanse of rockets and engineers working late into the night. The world outside felt like it was moving too fast, too much to do, too many people to please, too many goals to achieve. It was exhilarating, but also overwhelming. In the quiet of the room, he reflected on the long road that had brought him here, the challenges he had faced, and the way his life had transformed. He had sacrificed so much: his time, his personal life, his health, all in the name of progress. But now, with his new vision for collaboration, he wondered if there was another way forward. Was it possible to still lead, to continue the mission of transforming humanity's future, but do so in a way that didn't involve isolating himself? Was it possible to take a step back, allow others to lead, and still maintain a guiding hand? Elon picked up his phone and texted his longtime friend and collaborator, Gwynne Shotwell. "Elon, Gwynne, I've been thinking about our next steps. We're at a crossroads. We've built something incredible here, but I'm starting to wonder if it's time to rethink how we approach things moving forward. I think the future isn't about going it alone anymore. What do you think?" There was a pause before she replied. "Gwynne, you've always been ahead of the curve, Elon. If anyone can lead this kind of shift, it's you. But I think you're right. Maybe it's time for a new approach. We need to create space for others to lead, too. Let's discuss more tomorrow." Elon sat back in his chair, his mind racing. The idea of shifting the company's leadership style and embracing collaboration on a deeper level was both exciting and terrifying. But as he thought about it more, he realized that it was the logical next step. He had spent his career building companies with an unwavering focus on pushing the limits of what was possible. Now, it was time to push the limits of what could be achieved by others. The next day, Elon gathered the key leaders from both Tesla and SpaceX in a private meeting room. Gwynne Shotwell was present, as well as Jim Farley from Tesla, and a handful of senior engineers and strategists. Elon opened the conversation with a bold declaration. "I've been thinking a lot about the direction of our companies, and I've come to a conclusion that's not easy for me to admit," Elon began, his tone more reflective than usual. "We've done some incredible things: revolutionized electric cars, launched rockets into space, made massive strides in AI. But we can't do this alone anymore. The challenges ahead are bigger than any one company or any one person can tackle." He paused, allowing the words to sink in. Everyone at the table was used to Elon's bold vision, his larger-than-life goals. But this was different. This wasn't about pushing the envelope, it was about stepping back and seeing how everyone else could contribute to the cause. "I believe it's time for us to step into a new era, one where collaboration becomes the cornerstone of everything we do," he continued. "I'm not just talking about working with other companies. I'm talking about creating space for our own teams to lead. Giving them the autonomy to drive change, to innovate, and to shape the future." The room was silent for a moment. Jim Farley, ever the pragmatist, spoke first. "This sounds like a massive shift in culture," Jim said carefully. "Are we ready to relinquish control in some areas? We've always had a hands-on approach." "I know," Elon replied. "But think about it, if we want to change the world, we can't do it by working in isolation. Every department, every team, every individual should feel empowered to make decisions, to experiment, and to lead initiatives. I believe we can still maintain our focus on the big picture, but we need to embrace a new form of leadership, one where the vision is shared by everyone." Gwynne nodded. "It's about scaling the impact, not just the technology. We can't simply keep doing the same thing in a bigger way. We need a more inclusive and expansive vision." The discussions that followed were intense but productive. There was a palpable sense of excitement in the room, as each person present began to envision what the future could look like if they all embraced this new leadership approach. They talked about empowering employees, creating cross-functional teams, and building partnerships with even more organizations, particularly those from industries they hadn't previously considered. They also acknowledged that this new direction would be difficult. It would require a shift in the way they thought about success, failure, and innovation. But there was no denying the sense of potential in the air. If they could build a culture of true collaboration, they could change the world faster and more effectively than they ever could by relying on one person's vision alone. As the meeting ended, Elon walked out of the room with a renewed sense of purpose. He had spent so many years trying to push the world forward, now he realized that it was time to let the world push back, to see where the collective genius of his teams could take them. It was a bold step, and it wasn't without risks. But Elon was no stranger to risk. In fact, he thrived on it. And now, as he looked at the horizon, he felt a sense of peace. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, he was ready to walk it with others, rather than alone. In that moment, Elon Musk realized that true innovation wasn't just about breaking new ground, it was about breaking down barriers. It was about connecting people, ideas, and opportunities to create something greater than the sum of its parts. And that was the next frontier. The future was no longer something Elon Musk would build alone. It was something he would build with others, together. The road ahead was uncertain, but the destination was clearer than ever before. And this time, it wasn't about the destination alone. It was about how they would all get there. Elon Musk had spent his entire career proving the doubters wrong. From the time he first set out to build a rocket company to his mission of electrifying the automotive industry, he had defied the conventional wisdom that said, "It can't be done." But now, as he moved forward into uncharted territory, he was faced with a new kind of challenge, one that couldn't be solved by a grand vision or by simply pushing harder. The road ahead was paved with uncertainty. The world wasn't going to change overnight, and neither were the minds of the people who still clung to old ideas about competition, individualism, and traditional business models. But the more Elon thought about it, the more he realized that this moment, this tipping point, wasn't just about him, it was about the world around him, and how he could shift its course. It all started with a conversation he had one evening with a group of innovators at a global technology conference. Elon had been invited to speak on a panel about the future of space exploration and renewable energy, but as soon as he stepped into the green room, he felt something different. There was an energy in the air, a sense of urgency. As he mingled with the other panelists, including leaders from major tech companies, energy firms, and even some from the non-profit sector, the subject of collaboration kept coming up. Everyone seemed to agree that the world was at a crossroads, but no one knew exactly what it would take to break free from old patterns. Elon was quiet for a moment, taking it all in. His mind was racing, and then it hit him. This moment wasn't about just making a case for why collaboration was important, it was about demonstrating it, proving that it could be done in real time. He took a deep breath and turned to one of the younger entrepreneurs, a woman named Emma who had recently launched a successful clean energy startup. "Emma," Elon said, catching her attention. "How would you feel about making our next venture something truly collaborative? A global, open-source energy platform where anyone, companies, governments, individuals, could contribute and share their innovations freely. What if we could share our breakthroughs, rather than hoard them? We could create a model where competition no longer defines success, but rather our shared ability to solve global challenges." Emma blinked for a second, clearly processing the scale of what he was proposing. "Are you saying we should open source everything?" "Exactly," Elon said, his voice steady but charged with the kind of energy that had defined so much of his work in the past. "We've proven that tech companies can change the world. But now, it's time for a new kind of change, a change that's not just about making money. It's about making the world better. Together." Emma's eyes widened, and Elon could see the spark of possibility in her gaze. "It's a bold idea, but I think it could work." They spent the rest of the evening discussing the details, and by the end of the night, Elon realized that this could be the pivotal moment he'd been waiting for, the tipping point where his new vision for collaboration began to take form. The next day, Elon gathered his core leadership team, including Gwynne Shotwell, Jim Farley, and several key engineers from Tesla and SpaceX, to discuss what he had learned the night before. As soon as they all sat down in the conference room, he could tell they were ready for something new. His idea wasn't a side project, it was going to reshape the entire foundation of how Tesla, SpaceX, and his other ventures would operate. "We're going to create something unprecedented," Elon began, his voice filled with quiet conviction. "I've been thinking about what comes next, and I believe the world is ready for it. We're going to open source our technologies, everything from solar power to electric vehicles to rocket propulsion. Our future is no longer about creating proprietary solutions behind closed doors. It's about building a new kind of community, one where anyone, anywhere, can contribute to solving the biggest challenges we face." There was a pause as the team absorbed the magnitude of Elon's words. Gwynne was the first to respond, ever the pragmatist. "Elon, this is massive. Open sourcing our technology means that we lose control over our intellectual property. We could be giving away some of our most valuable assets." "I understand the risks," Elon replied, "but I think the potential outweighs them. Imagine if other companies and organizations could take what we've done with Tesla's batteries and improve upon them. Imagine what SpaceX could achieve if we shared our propulsion systems with other aerospace companies. What if universities and research institutions could get access to our most advanced AI models to further the development of clean energy or space exploration?" It was a radical shift from everything they had known, but as the team began to discuss the logistics, a sense of excitement took hold. It was risky, yes, but if they could make it work, they could set a new standard for innovation. A standard where collaboration wasn't just encouraged, it was the foundation of progress. The announcement came just a few weeks later. Elon Musk and his companies were opening up their technologies to the world. Every patent, every design, every algorithm would be made available to the public. There were immediate reactions, some positive, some skeptical, and some outright hostile. Competitors, especially those in the energy and automotive industries, were baffled. Why would a company like Tesla, which had spent years building its market share and protecting its intellectual property, suddenly throw that all away? Why would SpaceX, the company that had built its success on a proprietary approach to space travel, open its blueprints to the competition? Elon faced a wave of criticism, but he stood firm. He knew that this was the way forward, not just for his companies, but for the world. The true test, however, came when the global response began to unfold. Within weeks of the announcement, tech companies from around the world began to build on the innovations Musk's companies had pioneered. A small startup in Berlin adapted Tesla's battery technology to create low-cost, off-grid energy systems for rural villages in Africa. A group of engineers in Japan used SpaceX's rocket propulsion data to design more efficient satellites, cutting down on space debris and making space travel more sustainable. Universities in South America and Southeast Asia used Neuralink's open-source algorithms to develop new ways of treating neurological diseases in remote communities. As the world began to connect the dots, Elon realized that this was the kind of impact he had always dreamed of, an impact that was no longer confined to the companies he had built, but one that was spreading across the globe, in ways he had never imagined. But as the ripple effect of the open-source revolution spread, so did the challenges. The open-source model wasn't without its difficulties. There were questions of regulation, of maintaining safety standards, and of ensuring that the technology didn't fall into the wrong hands. Governments were hesitant to fully embrace the idea, fearing that it might disrupt the competitive landscape and create new vulnerabilities. Still, Elon believed that the only way to overcome these challenges was through more collaboration. Governments, corporations, and individuals all needed to come together to ensure the technologies were used responsibly. The open-source revolution wasn't just about giving away the keys to the kingdom, it was about creating a new paradigm, one in which the collective power of humanity could truly shine. As the months passed, Elon watched as the world slowly began to change. The tipping point had come, and the momentum was undeniable. People were no longer just looking to Silicon Valley or Washington, D.C., for solutions. They were looking to each other. And in that moment, Elon knew that the road less traveled, the one that embraced collaboration and shared progress, was the path that would lead humanity to a better future. It was the path he had chosen, and though it was still uncertain, it felt more right than anything he had ever done. This was the beginning of a new world, and the journey was just getting started. The world had begun to change in ways that no one could have predicted. Elon Musk's decision to open-source his company's technologies was no longer just a controversial decision, it was the spark that ignited a global movement. What had once seemed like an impossible, idealistic dream was now unfolding in front of his eyes, and the ripple effects were felt across industries, countries, and communities. It all started with small victories, projects that initially seemed like long shots but, over time, proved to be transformative. In rural villages across Africa, where access to reliable energy had always been a challenge, solar-powered systems that use Tesla's open-source battery technology were becoming more widespread. These communities, once left behind by large energy companies, were now thriving as they had the ability to generate their own clean energy at a fraction of the cost. In Asia, a team of engineers used SpaceX's rocket propulsion data to develop a new generation of satellite technology, cheaper, smaller, and more efficient, allowing smaller nations with limited space budgets to access space for communications, weather tracking, and scientific research. And in Latin America, a collaboration between universities, tech startups, and government agencies led to the rapid adoption of Neuralink's brain-computer interfaces, dramatically improving treatments for neurological diseases like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. The world was waking up to a new reality. No longer would the future of innovation belong solely to tech giants or government-backed organizations. It was now in the hands of people, ordinary people, living in small towns or crowded cities, who had never before imagined that they could be part of the global technological revolution. But as the success stories piled up, so did the pressure. Elon was aware that what he had started was far from complete. The idea of opening everything up to the world had set a new precedent, but there were still countless obstacles to overcome. Governments, while intrigued, were hesitant. Intellectual property laws were not designed for a world where technology was shared openly, and there was growing concern about security, who could be trusted with access to powerful technologies. While the benefits were clear, the dark side of openness also began to rear its head. There were attempts by rogue groups to steal and misuse the technology. The first signs of this were subtle, unexplained data breaches and attempts by smaller nations to weaponize the technologies for geopolitical gain. Elon had known from the beginning that these challenges were inevitable, but now the true test was upon him: could he manage the rapid spread of technology while ensuring that it was used responsibly? In one of his late-night strategy meetings with Gwynne Shotwell and other key leaders, Elon voiced his concerns. "We've started something incredible," Elon said, his voice serious. "But the reality is, this open-source approach isn't without risks. The last thing I want is for this technology to be used in harmful ways, or for it to fall into the wrong hands." Gwynne nodded, her face reflecting the same level of concern. "We're already seeing it, Elon. Smaller companies are benefiting, but there are also groups using the technology to build their own agendas. We need to find a way to ensure that the innovation isn't hijacked for harmful purposes. We need to put measures in place to maintain some level of oversight," Elon agreed, his mind already working on solutions. "We can't control everything, but maybe we can create a global, open-source registry, a platform where people and organizations using our technologies can sign up and be vetted. We could also work with international organizations to set up ethical guidelines for how the technologies should be used." Jim Farley, who had been silent up until this point, spoke up. "Elon, I think the registry idea is worth exploring, but we also need to consider the bigger picture. The more we open up, the more we'll need to collaborate with governments and other entities. We can't just create a decentralized system without some form of governance." Elon paused, thinking for a moment. "You're right. We can't go into this blindly. But I believe that if we collaborate with governments, and with international organizations like the UN, we can make this work. We need to establish a framework that ensures these technologies are used for good, not for power or profit. It was a difficult conversation, but one that was necessary. Over the next few months, Elon and his team worked tirelessly to establish the parameters for the open-source revolution they had ignited. They partnered with global organizations to create a set of international standards that would govern the use of shared technologies. They introduced a vetting process for organizations and individuals who wanted to use their open-source innovations, ensuring that anyone involved in the movement was held to the highest ethical standards. At the same time, Elon made a concerted effort to communicate openly with the public about the importance of responsible innovation. He appeared on global stages, from the United Nations to tech conferences around the world, urging leaders and innovators to come together and ensure that the benefits of open-source technology would be felt by everyone, especially those who had historically been left out of the conversation. But despite the challenges, the benefits continued to mount. In Africa, entire regions that had once been entirely dependent on fossil fuels were now thriving thanks to decentralized solar grids powered by Tesla's open-source technology. In the Middle East, where geopolitical tensions had long hampered cooperation, countries that had once been at odds were now sharing data and resources to build the infrastructure for space exploration and renewable energy. As the months turned into years, the open-source movement became something larger than anyone could have predicted. What had started as an idea to democratize innovation had turned into a global network of people and organizations working together toward shared goals. The technologies that had once been confined to the privileged few were now available to everyone, and the world was beginning to change in profound ways. But even as Elon looked around and saw the transformation taking place, he knew that this was only the beginning. The challenges of the future would be greater than anything humanity had ever faced: climate change, resource depletion, and the threats posed by artificial intelligence, to name just a few. And yet, as Elon stood in the middle of it all, he felt a sense of hope unlike any he had ever experienced. The world was moving in a new direction, one where collaboration, innovation, and shared progress were the driving forces. It was a direction that he, too, had to follow. For the first time in a long while, Elon Musk wasn't thinking about the next big thing he could build. Instead, he was thinking about the next big thing the world could build, together. The ripple effect was now a tidal wave. What Elon had set in motion had far exceeded his expectations, and as he continued to push the boundaries of what was possible, he realized that the most important thing he could do was to continue to empower others, to create the space for new ideas to flourish. For the future wasn't about any one individual. It was about the collective potential of humanity, and in that collective, Elon saw the hope for a new, brighter world. The momentum of Elon Musk's open-source revolution was undeniable. The world had entered a new era where collaboration, rather than competition, was the cornerstone of technological progress. What had once been his dream was now becoming a reality, an interconnected, global network of innovators working together to solve the most pressing challenges of the age. Yet, as the world embraced this new paradigm, it was clear that there was still much work to be done. In the midst of the whirlwind of success, Elon found himself reflecting on the path ahead. The future was no longer a series of isolated, self-contained projects. It was an intricate web of possibilities, each one feeding into the other, expanding and evolving at an exponential rate. The work was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. As he sat in his office at SpaceX headquarters, he glanced at the monitors before him. Data from all over the world was flooding in, projects, ideas, proposals. All powered by the technologies that had once been exclusive to his companies. He saw small startups in remote villages creating clean energy solutions. He saw entire communities shifting from dependence on fossil fuels to renewable resources, empowered by Tesla's solar technology. He saw governments banding together to launch space exploration projects that had once been the exclusive domain of the superpowers. But even as these advancements brought hope, they also brought new challenges. The rapid pace of innovation had outgrown the ability of traditional systems, legal, economic, and political, to keep up. Regulations designed for a time when competition was the driving force were now outdated. Intellectual property laws were a patchwork of old frameworks, unable to keep pace with the new reality of shared technology. As more people and organizations gained access to the tools that were once restricted, questions of security, privacy, and governance became increasingly complex. Elon was no stranger to obstacles, but the challenge before him now was different. It wasn't about convincing people to see things his way, it was about ensuring that the vision he had started could continue to thrive in a world that was changing faster than anyone could predict. It became clear to Elon that the movement needed more than just technological innovation, it needed a new kind of leadership, one that could navigate the complexities of a global, open-source world. The pace of innovation was outpacing the ability of governments and institutions to regulate it effectively. The world had entered a new age, and the rules had to be rewritten. But who would write them? In a meeting with his leadership team, Elon laid out his concerns. We're at a point where the technology is out there, but the infrastructure to support it isn't. We need to create new systems, new models for governance, and new frameworks for ethics. If we don't, we'll risk the open-source movement being co-opted by forces that don't have our best interests at heart. Gwynne Shotwell, ever the pragmatist, nodded in agreement. You're right. We're creating a revolution, but we need to make sure it doesn't spiral out of control. We need a way to ensure that our open-source technologies are being used for the greater good. We also need to make sure that the power of these technologies doesn't end up in the wrong hands, Jim Farley added. We've seen what can happen when bad actors get access to powerful tools. We can't afford to ignore that. Elon leaned back in his chair, lost in thought. The question wasn't just about creating new technology. It was about creating a new society, one that embraced the open-source ethos but also protected the values that had made the movement successful in the first place: collaboration, transparency, and responsibility. The first step was clear: Elon knew he needed to build alliances. The next phase of the revolution wouldn't be about creating more tech, it would be about building the systems that would support it. This meant working with governments, legal experts, and organizations that were focused on international relations. It meant engaging with ethicists, philosophers, and social scientists to ensure that the technology would be used responsibly. In the months that followed, Elon began to lay the groundwork for what would eventually become a global council, a body designed to help regulate the use of open-source technologies and ensure that they were being deployed ethically. The council would consist of experts from diverse fields: technology, politics, law, ethics, and global development. Its purpose would be to set global standards for the use of these technologies, ensure they were accessible to all, and create frameworks for accountability. But building such a council wasn't easy. The idea of creating a governing body that would have authority over global technological development was controversial in itself. Some governments resisted the idea, viewing it as an infringement on their sovereignty. Others saw it as a chance to centralize power in a way that could further entrench inequalities. Despite the challenges, Elon was determined to make it work. We have to create something that brings everyone to the table, he said during one of the council meetings. We need to make sure that every nation, every community, has a voice in this process. We're not just building technology, we're building the framework for the future of humanity. As the discussions continued, it became clear that the council's success would depend on cooperation, not just between governments, but between sectors. The private sector, nonprofits, and individuals would all need to be part of the conversation. This was a task far more complex than any one company or organization could manage. It was about forging a new kind of global partnership, where innovation and ethical responsibility could coexist. The first challenge the council faced was the issue of equitable access to the technologies. While the open-source movement had democratized innovation in many ways, it had also created new divides. Wealthier nations and corporations were able to harness the power of the technologies more effectively than poorer, developing nations. Elon knew that ensuring global equity would be key to the movement's long-term success. We need to focus on the regions that are most in need, Elon said during one of the council's early meetings. We've seen the success in Africa, but there's still so much more to do. We need to create programs that target the poorest countries and give them the tools they need to thrive. The Council agreed that a global effort was needed, one that would help bridge the divide between rich and poor nations and ensure that the benefits of the open-source revolution were spread equitably. As Elon looked ahead, he knew the road would be long. The challenges were enormous, and there was no guarantee of success. But he also knew that the opportunity before him was too great to ignore. The future of humanity was in the balance, and the choices made in these early years would shape the world for generations to come. In the end, it wasn't just about the technology. It was about how humanity chose to use that technology, and whether they could build a future where innovation was a force for good, not just for the few, but for all. Elon took a deep breath, looking out over the horizon. There was still so much to be done, but he had never been more certain of the path ahead. Together, the world could overcome the challenges of the future. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be worth it. And with that, he began preparing for the next step of the journey, one that would take him beyond the boundaries of Earth, to the stars themselves. With the world on the brink of a new era, one that was built on openness, innovation, and shared responsibility, Elon Musk felt the stirring of something far greater on the horizon. He had long dreamt of reaching the stars, not for the sake of exploration alone, but because he believed humanity's survival was tied to expanding beyond Earth. Yet, as the open-source revolution flourished, Elon realized that the mission to colonize Mars was no longer a distant dream, it was now more urgent than ever. The world had changed in profound ways, and now the stakes had grown higher. The conversation began on an ordinary afternoon. Elon, Gwyn, and the leadership team were discussing the continued advancements with Tesla, Neuralink, and SpaceX when the subject of Mars was brought up. They had all been working around the clock to maintain momentum with Earth-based projects, but the looming question remained: how would humanity adapt to the next phase? It's clear that Earth is becoming more sustainable, Elon said, his tone thoughtful. We've made huge strides with solar energy, electric vehicles, and even space-based internet. But we still face major challenges: climate change, overpopulation, and the geopolitical instability that continues to grow. We can't afford to wait any longer. Mars isn't just a dream, it's a necessity. Gwyn nodded, understanding the gravity of the statement. We've done so much already with SpaceX, but to make life on Mars a reality, we need more than rockets and technology. We need to build infrastructure, cities, farms, ecosystems. The scale of it is unprecedented. Elon's eyes sparkled with the familiar glint of ambition. Exactly. We need to take everything we've learned from the open-source movement on Earth and apply it to Mars. The technologies we've built, especially the ones we've made open-source, are the foundation for what's to come. We can't repeat the mistakes of the past. Mars must be a place where collaboration and shared resources drive progress. The idea of a Martian colony had once been a lofty vision that had captured the imagination of space enthusiasts. But now, under Elon's leadership, it had become a matter of survival for humanity. The more he thought about it, the more he understood the necessity of a new kind of settlement, one that would be entirely self-sustaining and built on principles of sustainability, equity, and global collaboration. The first major step was the establishment of a Martian Research and Development Center. A hub where scientists, engineers, and visionaries from all over the world could come together to figure out the logistics of colonizing Mars. SpaceX was tasked with the logistics of transportation, using reusable starships to ferry cargo and people to the Red Planet. But more than that, Elon was determined to ensure that the systems that would govern Mars were transparent, open, and fair. He reached out to experts from across various fields: sustainability, agriculture, architecture, and even law. He brought in ethical thinkers to ensure that the systems put in place on Mars were grounded in fairness and shared responsibility. The goal was not just to build a colony but to create a model for how humanity could live sustainably and harmoniously on another planet. We need to create a model for Mars that doesn't repeat the mistakes of Earth, Elon said in one of the initial planning sessions. Mars should be a place where the best ideas, the most creative solutions, and the most forward-thinking minds come together to build something greater than ourselves. It can't be about competition. It must be about collaboration. While many were enthusiastic about the idea of colonizing Mars, there were those who remained skeptical. Critics questioned the ethical implications of such an ambitious project, arguing that humanity should focus on fixing Earth's problems before venturing into space. Environmentalists raised concerns about the potential environmental impact of human settlement on Mars, even if it was an uninhabited planet. Others pointed out that the resources required for such a project could be better spent on addressing global poverty or climate change. Elon had always known that his ideas would be controversial. Yet, in his heart, he believed that expanding to Mars was not just about escaping Earth's problems, it was about ensuring the long-term survival of humanity. His response to critics was simple: by making life multiplanetary, we're ensuring that humanity won't be dependent on a single point of failure. It's not an either/or situation. We can work to fix Earth and build a future in space. He knew the challenges were immense. Mars was a barren, inhospitable world. The atmosphere was thin, and temperatures could drop to -195 degrees Fahrenheit. But there was something about the sheer audacity of the project that called to him. Just as he had done with electric cars and reusable rockets, Elon was determined to prove that the impossible could be done. The first significant breakthrough came when SpaceX successfully launched a prototype of the Mars Habitat Module. The module, designed for deep space travel and long-term habitation on Mars, was a marvel of engineering. It could sustain a crew of 5 for up to 30 days, with all the necessary resources for survival: oxygen, food, water, and energy, provided through a self-sustaining system. At the same time, researchers and engineers were working on developing advanced technologies for building cities on Mars. They focused on creating closed-loop ecosystems, where air, water, and food would be recycled and replenished without the need for constant resupply from Earth. In addition to the research on sustainable agriculture, new technologies for extracting water from the Martian soil and creating breathable atmospheres were being tested in laboratories around the world. Meanwhile, Elon reached out to global leaders to start the conversation about governing Mars. He called for a global treaty that would ensure that the colonization of Mars would be a shared endeavor, not something dominated by any one nation or corporation. His goal was to create a set of international agreements that would ensure the peaceful exploration of space and prevent the exploitation of Mars for profit. Despite the advances, there were still setbacks. The logistics of sending large numbers of people to Mars proved more complex than anticipated. The supply chains needed to keep a Martian colony running were vast, and Elon began to realize that a single corporation couldn't manage such an undertaking alone. The project needed to be a collective effort. So, Elon began to look outward once more. He initiated discussions with major global space agencies and private companies, urging them to collaborate on the project. He believed that the collective ingenuity of humanity could overcome any challenge, just as it had done with open-source technology on Earth. Months turned into years, and the dream of a sustainable, collaborative Martian colony began to take shape. The first group of astronauts would soon depart from Mars, aboard a fleet of starships, with the first step of humanity's multiplanetary future becoming a reality. But even as he saw the dream unfolding, Elon knew that this was only the beginning. Mars was just the first step. The real challenge, he believed, lay in creating a future where humanity could live sustainably across multiple planets. Mars was the testing ground, the proving ground, and the hope for humanity's survival. But beyond Mars, there were worlds yet to be explored, worlds that, in time, could offer new homes for generations to come. As Elon stood on the launch pad, watching the final preparations unfold for the first mission to Mars, he felt a deep sense of pride and anticipation. The world was watching. But it wasn't just SpaceX or Elon Musk who were venturing into the stars. It was all of humanity, working together to build a future among the stars. And with that, he knew, this was only the beginning. The future of humanity was limitless, and the stars were within reach. The journey to Mars, a project that had once been the stuff of science fiction, was now a reality. The first starship landed on the red planet, and the world watched in awe. But despite the excitement and optimism surrounding humanity's first steps on Mars, no one had anticipated the true scale of the challenges that would come with settling on a new planet. The mission had been a success, the crew had made it. But as the first settlers stepped onto Martian soil, they were immediately confronted with an unsettling reality: Mars wasn't simply another place to visit. It was an entirely new world, with an environment so harsh, so alien, that every moment felt like a struggle for survival. The initial stages of the mission went according to plan. The habitat modules were deployed, and the crew began setting up the basic infrastructure. Communication with Earth remained stable, and the early experiments in creating sustainable ecosystems seemed promising. But it quickly became clear that even the most advanced technologies couldn't shield them from the raw realities of life on Mars. The first major setback came when the oxygen generator malfunctioned, leaving the colony without a reliable supply of breathable air for several days. Despite the crew's quick thinking and ingenuity, this was a stark reminder that, no matter how advanced the technology, nothing could fully prepare them for the unforgiving nature of the planet. Every task, no matter how mundane, was fraught with danger. Elon watched the reports come in, his mind racing. The colony's success was crucial not just for Mars, but for the future of humanity. He knew this project couldn't afford any mistakes, people's lives were at stake. But as the situation on Mars unfolded, he began to question whether the mission was advancing too quickly, and if it was possible to truly prepare for everything Mars could throw at them. Days turned into weeks, and the crew struggled to adapt. The thin atmosphere of Mars made every day a battle against the elements, and the absence of liquid water meant that every drop had to be harvested, extracted, or transported. The Martian soil, though rich in minerals, lacked the organic compounds necessary to support Earth-like life, making agriculture an uphill battle. As supplies from Earth began to dwindle, the colonists' reliance on self-sustaining systems grew, and every failure in the infrastructure felt like a ticking time bomb. Elon sat in his office, staring at the data streaming in from Mars. Gwyn walked in, her expression grim. "We've got some serious issues with the water extraction system. The power grids aren't holding up like we expected." Elon rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of the situation. "We knew this was going to be difficult, but we didn't anticipate this level of unpredictability. The systems are more fragile than we thought. Every failure on Mars is a crisis waiting to happen." "But we're learning," Gwyn countered. "We've overcome setbacks before, right? And we've got the brightest minds on Earth working on this. If anyone can figure this out, it's us." Elon nodded but couldn't shake the feeling of unease. "I hope you're right. But we need to start thinking bigger. Mars isn't a place where we can just go and fix things on the fly. We need a long-term plan that adapts to this planet's unpredictability." Back on Earth, the entire world was following the mission closely. The excitement of the early days quickly gave way to growing concern. News outlets, once filled with praise for the ambitious Mars project, began to report on the challenges the crew faced. Social media buzzed with speculation and skepticism. Was Mars really ready for humanity? Were the colonists prepared for the risks? Was the technology really as fail-safe as advertised? Elon watched the public reaction unfold with a mixture of frustration and resolve. He had always known that his ventures would face intense scrutiny, but this was different. The fate of the colony wasn't just in the hands of his engineers and astronauts, it was now in the hands of the entire world, who watched with bated breath. And as the first setbacks rolled in, the pressure grew. At a public event, a reporter asked, "Mr. Musk, there are growing concerns about the sustainability of life on Mars. The recent failures with oxygen and water supply are concerning. How do you respond to critics who say the Mars project is moving too quickly?" Elon, never one to shy away from tough questions, responded, "Space exploration is always going to have risks. There are no guarantees. But the alternative is to sit idly by while the planet we call home continues to degrade. We have to push forward, even when it's difficult. And that's exactly what we're doing. His words were bold, but the reality was that the situation on Mars was far from certain. Elon couldn't help but feel a weight on his shoulders. If the colony failed, it wouldn't just be a setback for SpaceX, it would set back humanity's future in space by decades. But failure, as he knew all too well, was part of the journey. And if humanity was going to survive, it needed to take these risks. Back on Mars, the situation was growing more dire. The crew had managed to fix the oxygen generator and re-establish a steady supply of breathable air, but the water situation was worsening. The water extraction system, which had been built with the best technology available, was struggling to extract enough liquid from the Martian soil. Without water, the colony couldn't survive. The pressure was mounting, and the team knew they were running out of time. One evening, as the team gathered in the command center, Elon received a message from the crew on Mars. They had identified a potential source of water beneath the surface, a vast underground reservoir that could provide the colony with the resources it needed. But to reach it, they would need to dig deeper into the Martian crust, a process that would take time and require more power than the colony could spare. "Do we try to tap into the underground reservoir?" Gwyn asked, her voice tinged with concern. "It could solve all our problems. But it's risky." Elon thought for a moment. "If we don't try, we may not survive. But if we do, we need to make sure we're prepared for whatever happens. We can't afford another failure." The decision was made. The crew would begin drilling to access the underground water, hoping that the risk would pay off. It was a gamble, one that would determine the future of the Mars mission, and perhaps the future of humanity's presence on other planets. As the drilling operation began, Elon felt the weight of the moment. He had always believed that Mars was humanity's next step. But now, with every passing day, he was beginning to realize that the path to the stars was fraught with unforeseen struggles. The challenges were greater than anyone could have imagined, but so were the stakes. If Mars was to be humanity's new home, it wouldn't be easy. But Elon was resolute. No matter the cost, humanity could not afford to turn back now. The road to Mars had only just begun, and the future depended on the courage to face the unknown, to endure the hardships, and to push forward, even when the stars seemed distant and unreachable. And so, with each passing day, as the Martian colony fought to survive, Elon Musk continued to lead, driven by the belief that the only way forward was through the struggle. The dream of Mars was alive, but it would take every ounce of human ingenuity and perseverance to see it come to life. The struggle to survive on Mars had not been easy, but the first glimmers of hope were beginning to break through. After months of tension, setbacks, and near disasters, the breakthrough finally came. The drilling operation, which had been fraught with uncertainty and risk, had yielded results. The underground reservoir, a massive source of liquid water hidden deep beneath the Martian surface, had been tapped. The team on Mars had spent weeks drilling through the red dust and rock, using every ounce of their expertise to avoid catastrophic failure. As the drill bit finally pierced the underground reservoir, a flood of water began to trickle up through the pipes. It was a moment of triumph, a moment that could mean the difference between life and death for the Martian colony. Elon Musk stood in the control room at SpaceX headquarters, watching the data stream in. His heart raced as he saw the water levels rise in the colony's storage tanks. This was the breakthrough they had all been waiting for. This was the moment that would change everything. The mission could continue. Mars was no longer a barren wasteland, but a place where humanity could build a future. "Mission Control, we've got water," the voice of the commander echoed through the speakers, crackling with excitement. "It's coming through. We've got a sustainable source." Elon exhaled, not realizing he'd been holding his breath. The sound of the team's cheers over the comms felt like a burst of energy, proof that the human spirit, when pushed to its limits, could overcome even the harshest challenges. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to smile. On Earth, the news of the breakthrough spread like wildfire. People from every corner of the globe tuned in, their eyes fixed on the unfolding drama of humanity's first settlement on Mars. What had once seemed impossible was now a reality. The world was watching as humanity stood on the edge of a new frontier. For the first time since the mission began, the media buzzed with excitement and optimism rather than skepticism and fear. Public opinion began to shift. Mars was no longer just a far-off dream, it was becoming a place of opportunity and hope. The waters of the underground reservoir were more than just a lifeline for the colony, they were a symbol of humanity's resilience. However, Elon knew that this was only one step in a long and difficult journey. The water was a crucial victory, but there were still countless obstacles ahead. Mars was still an inhospitable world, and the colony was just a small, fragile outpost on the surface. There was much work to be done before the vision of a thriving Martian civilization could be realized. Back on Mars, the crew worked tirelessly to integrate the water supply into the colony's infrastructure. With each passing day, the systems became more efficient, more resilient. They had faced so many setbacks, but now they had the resources to begin expanding. They could start planting crops, building more habitat modules, and preparing for the next phase of their mission. The dream of a self-sustaining colony was finally within reach. But even as they celebrated the success, the challenges of life on Mars remained ever present. The colony was still vulnerable. The harsh conditions of the Martian environment, the constant struggle to maintain the fragile infrastructure, and the psychological strain of living in isolation, these were all issues that needed to be addressed. Elon had always believed in the power of innovation to solve problems, but as he watched the first reports come in from the crew, he realized that there was something more fundamental at play. The survival of the colony, and of humanity's future on Mars, would not just depend on technology. It would depend on people. The human spirit would be the ultimate test of whether Mars could ever become a new home for mankind. Gwynne Shotwell, who had been by Elon's side through the darkest moments of the Mars project, sat in the control room with a quiet smile on her face. She had seen so much uncertainty, so many close calls, but she had never doubted Elon's vision for a second. "You did it," she said, turning to him with a look of quiet pride. "We did it." Elon's response was understated, as always. "It's not over yet. We've got a lot more work to do. But we've taken a huge step forward." "You know, there was a time when people thought this was impossible," Gwynne remarked. "Now look at us. It's real." Elon's eyes softened for a moment, and then he turned back to the monitors. "Mars is just the beginning. We've got to think beyond this colony. Humanity needs a future, and it can't all be tied to one planet." Gwynne nodded. "It's never just been about Mars, has it?" "No," Elon said with quiet determination. "It's about the stars." As the colony on Mars grew, so did the realization that this was just the first step in an even grander vision. Elon's eyes were already set on the next phase, the establishment of a permanent, self-sustaining presence on Mars, and then, in the distant future, beyond Mars to the outer planets. Space travel, once an exciting possibility, had become a necessary endeavor. Mars could become the cornerstone of humanity's multiplanetary future. But Elon knew the road ahead would not be easy. The challenges would only grow, the stakes would get higher, and the risks would continue to multiply. But he also knew that humanity had never backed down from a challenge. The desire to explore, to innovate, and to survive was woven into the very fabric of human nature. And as the Martian sun rose over the colony, casting long shadows over the newly built habitats, Elon felt a deep sense of purpose. They had made it this far, but this was just the beginning. The future of humanity was no longer bound to Earth. It was waiting out there among the stars. Back on Earth, the public reaction was one of astonishment. People from all walks of life celebrated the successful water extraction, which was hailed as a symbol of human ingenuity and resilience. Elon Musk, once seen as an eccentric billionaire with lofty goals, was now being recognized as the visionary who had made the impossible possible. But for Elon, the real victory was not the headlines or the accolades, it was the knowledge that humanity had taken its first steps toward becoming a multiplanetary species. In his mind, the importance of the mission was always about survival, about ensuring that humanity would not be confined to a single planet. Earth, for all its beauty and wonder, was a fragile world. The future of the human race had to be more than just surviving on one small, vulnerable world. As the years went by, the settlement on Mars continued to grow. New missions were launched, bringing more settlers, more supplies, and more technology to support the burgeoning colony. But no matter how far humanity advanced, Elon never lost sight of the original goal, to create a sustainable, thriving society on Mars. The mission had never been about just reaching Mars, it was about building a new home for the future of humanity. In the end, Mars was not just a stepping stone to the stars. It became a symbol of what humanity could accomplish when it dared to dream big, when it embraced the challenges, and when it worked together to overcome the impossible. And as Elon Musk looked up at the stars, he knew that this was only the beginning. The future of humanity was just getting started. The colony on Mars was no longer just a handful of settlers in an isolated outpost. It had grown into a thriving hub of human innovation, a symbol of resilience, and a beacon of hope for the future of humanity. But as the years passed and the first true Martian cities began to rise from the red soil, Elon Musk knew that the implications of this new frontier went far beyond the red planet. The mission that had once seemed impossible had now surpassed expectations. With the water supply secured, the crew was working on refining agriculture, building more efficient energy systems, and designing sustainable habitats that could endure Mars' harsh environment. What had been a fragile colony struggling to survive was now a permanent outpost, complete with schools, research facilities, and industries designed to support the growing population. The vision of a self-sustaining Mars colony was now a reality. But for Elon, the bigger picture was still in motion. Mars was only the beginning. Space exploration had to be more than a series of isolated missions, it had to be a new way of life. Gwyn, Elon said one evening, standing in the observation deck of SpaceX's headquarters, looking up at the stars. Do you realize that we've essentially opened the door for humanity to become a multiplanetary species? Gwyn smiled, her gaze following Elon's. I've known that since the first successful launch, but now it feels like a certainty. We've made it happen. We've taken the first step to the stars. Elon nodded, his mind already moving ahead. Mars is only one part of this vision. The real question is, how do we build on it? How do we make sure this isn't just a temporary outpost, but the beginning of a new era for humanity? The idea of expanding humanity's reach beyond Earth had always been Elon's driving force. The human race had grown too comfortable, too complacent on its home planet. But as climate change, overpopulation, and dwindling resources became ever more pressing issues on Earth, the question of survival began to loom larger. Mars offered a new home, yes, but Elon believed that humanity could, and should, stretch its ambitions even further. It wasn't just about leaving Earth behind, it was about creating a future where humanity could flourish across multiple planets, reducing the risks that came with being tied to a single fragile world. The colonization of Mars had already sparked a new wave of technological advancements. The successful water extraction, efficient life support systems, and breakthroughs in sustainable agriculture were just the beginning. Elon and his team were already working on new methods to explore and colonize the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. And beyond that? Perhaps even the outer reaches of the galaxy. We've made it to Mars, Elon would often say, but we're not stopping there. This is just the start of something much bigger. Back on Earth, the ripple effect of Mars' success was felt in every corner of the globe. Space travel, once the domain of a few elite nations and corporations, had become an international effort. Countries around the world began to collaborate, pooling their resources and expertise to support the Mars mission and future space exploration endeavors. In this new world of shared vision, old rivalries were set aside in favor of a common goal. Global economies began shifting, with industries centered on space travel, resource extraction, and off-world colonization gaining more investment. Cities once teeming with pollution and overpopulation began implementing advanced technologies, inspired by the sustainability efforts that had been perfected on Mars. And while some regions of the Earth still struggled with environmental damage and inequality, the possibility of a new frontier offered hope, a way out, and perhaps, a chance for Earth's healing. The technological breakthroughs and innovations that SpaceX and other companies were leading didn't just stay in the realm of space exploration, they were being adapted to improve life on Earth. Renewable energy sources, advanced agriculture techniques, and carbon capture technologies were all part of the ripple effect. Mars was becoming a laboratory for solutions that could potentially save the planet that had given birth to humanity. But while the focus on Mars dominated the headlines, Earth was never far from Elon's mind. As the first permanent settlement on Mars thrived, he continued to work tirelessly toward the mission that had always been his passion, ensuring humanity's survival and success. However, even with all the progress made, there were still those who questioned the ethics of it all. Was it right to prioritize the colonization of Mars when Earth's problems were so urgent? Some critics argued that resources should be spent on healing the planet, not escaping it. But Elon had always believed that the two were not mutually exclusive. Saving Earth and expanding beyond it were both critical. In his mind, the future of humanity depended on both. Earth needed time to heal, but humanity also needed a new home, one where it could continue to grow and evolve without the looming threat of extinction. As the Mars colony continued to grow, so too did the moral and philosophical conversations surrounding space colonization. Questions of governance, rights, and the ethical use of Martian resources became pressing issues. Mars was no longer just a distant dream, it was now a place where humanity was building a future, with all the complexities and responsibilities that came with it. Elon often found himself in discussions with world leaders, scientists, and philosophers, debating what kind of society humanity would build on Mars. He had a vision, but he knew that it needed to be shaped by more than just technology. It needed to reflect the lessons learned from Earth. As the Martian colonies grew, the first few generations of Martian-born humans began to come of age. These young people had never known Earth as their home. They had grown up on Mars, surrounded by the dusty red plains and the harsh atmosphere that had once seemed impossible to tame. For them, Mars wasn't just a stepping stone, it was their home. These young Martians represented the future, a generation that would shape not just the future of Mars, but also the future of humanity's reach in the universe. Elon often found himself in awe of them, knowing that they would be the ones to carry forward the dream of multiplanetary life, and maybe even take it to places he had never imagined. One night, as he stood looking out over the Martian horizon through a massive glass window in the headquarters of SpaceX's Mars operation, Elon reflected on the long road that had brought him to this point. The countless sleepless nights, the failures, the criticisms, the impossible odds. He had endured it all. And now, standing on the precipice of humanity's future, he felt a sense of fulfillment that no amount of success on Earth could ever compare to. "We've done it," he whispered to himself, his voice barely audible against the vast silence of space. But this is just the beginning. Elon knew that Mars was just one of many challenges to come. There were new frontiers to explore, new colonies to build, and new civilizations to forge. But humanity was no longer alone. It had found a way to reach out beyond its cradle, beyond Earth, and touch the stars. And in that moment, as the first stars appeared in the Martian sky, Elon Musk understood that the real legacy of the Mars mission wasn't just the technology or the infrastructure, it was the hope that it had instilled in humanity. A hope that no matter how tough things seemed, no matter how impossible the odds, humanity could always reach further. The dream of Mars had become the reality of tomorrow. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?